Chapter 804. Time passed, and more people were seen at Toonkeeper Village. The tranquility of the village seemed to have been broken, and many kept their guard up. They seemed prepared and knew something would have happened to the village. Time passed, and more people were seen at Toonkeeper Village. The tranquility of the village seemed to have been broken, and many kept their guard up. They seemed prepared and knew something would have happened to the village. One sword diagram after another hovered before Futian in the small house that he stayed in. The diagrams were handed to him by the village chief that day, which were the sword matrix diagram in the nether sword mound. The chief had handed them to him to allow him to comprehend them beforehand. Futian felt a sense of familiarity from those sword diagrams, which originated from the time when he was breaking the game back in the Chess Saint Villa. The 10 sword diagrams seemed to be the 10 major sword matrices, corresponding to the 9 matrices and the eventual 9 interconnected matrices of the Celestial Dragon chess game at the Chess Saint Villa. While the Chess Saint was able to get familiar with the sword matrices of the Nether Sword Mound, he was unable to completely fathom the entire thing and replicate them in the Chess Saint Villa. Compared to the ones at the villa, the one Futian was seeing there was the actual source, which might be more powerful. While Futian had broken the Celestial Dragon chess game before, he nonetheless had to be cautious, and so he spent his days working on comprehending the matrix. At the very moment, his spiritual will was completely immersed within the sword diagrams. The 10 diagrams seemed to be 10 different ultimate arts of the sword, bringing terrifying power to bear. He had even allowed his third brother, Wuchen, Su Kei, and Zui Qianzhou to sense the diagrams. They all were trained in the way of the sword, and their experience verified Futian's guess. Those matrices imbued within the sword diagrams were incredibly powerful art of the sword. Futian then heard footsteps and waved his hand, making the diagrams disappear. He peered outside the door and saw the figure who walked in simply looked at him, without saying anything. She seemed to be in a rather bad mood as well. "What is it, little girl?" Futian smiled and asked. "There are quite a lot of people from all over the 9 states here in the village. Some are pretty awesome. Do you want to reconsider going in for the moment?" Yaya looked at Futian and said. Futian looked puzzled before a beaming smile appeared in his eyes. He looked at her and answered, "You're worried about your brother then? Worried about you?" Yaya turned her head away, but she quickly found something off with that action. "Wait, am I admitting that he's my brother now?" She turned around and saw Futian looking at her with a half-smile. She could not help but glare at him. This guy sure knows how to play me. Sister Jiu was right about him after all. You don't look like that girl who went to beat everyone at the 9-state forum at all now. Futian smiled and added. Yaya deemed everyone from the 9 states unworthy of fighting her during the 9-state forum. She deemed herself the supreme one until she was beaten by Yuxing eventually. And now, she was worried about Futian. Things were different back then. Yaya looked at Futian and added, "The village chief said that this time, the fate of the village is concerned and he had us prepare. You're not from the village, so this has nothing to do with you. So what are you staying here for?" Futian, of course, knew that things were indeed different. The 9-state forum was an event to test the skills of the sacred grounds of all 9 states. It was a grand event that involved all 9 states, and whatever happened, all sacred grounds would have demonstrated a good measure of decent attitude. However, things this time was concerned about the number 1 sword of the 9 states, the unparalleled sword matrix of the Sword Saint of the Void, as well as a fearsome training ground. Futian walked up and knocked Yaya on the head. The little girl simply glared at him without resisting. She has gotten used to it. "Well, I'll still have to take care of you." Futian walked out of the room and asked, "Are there many in the village now?" "Yeah." Yaya nodded. "Many went to look for the chief." "Well, that's to say that we don't have much time left," Futian said lightly. It was a given that he needed to completely master the sword diagrams before going into the Nether Sword Mound, so as to have a chance of coming out alive. He might have had a death wish if he were to simply walk in there at his current plane level, unprepared. The place was able to trap even saints, after all. At that moment, footsteps were heard from afar. Futian turned his eyes at the sound and saw a group of people with exceptional bearing walking in his direction. The one taking the lead was none other than Lu Zong, whom he had seen several times. "So you're here at the Tombkeeper village as well, Palace Lord Yi?" Lu Zong said with a smile. Yi Futian peered at the people behind Lu Zong and found all 9 students of the Chess Saint to be present. There were also mighty ones from Shihua Sacred Mountain. However, Lu Zong was the one taking the lead instead, which spoke volumes of his status at that sacred ground. Other than that, Lu Zong had also acquired the Chess Saint's lineage, and he was possibly the one who knew the Nether Sword Mound best, other than the chief. The Chess Saint was, after all, trapped within the Sword Mound. Yang Xiao, a student of the Chess Saint, also nodded casually at Yi Futian. Yi Futian had good impressions of the students of the Chess Saint. They had their own stances in this case, as it concerned their teacher. However, he was rather puzzled about Li Kaishan, who was known to be an honest man. Even his brothers and sisters felt rather surprised at what he did before. But then again, none of that mattered now, and none of that had anything to do with Yi Futian. "The chief asked me to come, and I've been here for quite some time." Yi Futian continued with a smile. "So, why is the Shihua Sacred Mountain entourage here?" Yi Futian's presence alone served as an answer to some questions, and there was no need to hide anything by then. Many would have guessed that it was either Yi Futian or Yu Sheng chosen as the successor by the Tombkeeper village. "I'm sure you know, Palace Lord Yi, that Senior Chess Saint was now trapped within the Nether Sword Mound. We are here to rescue him." Lu Zong smiled and said, "You also broke the Celestial Dragon chess game back at the Chess Saint Villa, Palace Lord Yi. Would you mind giving us a hand? I'm thinking that if the rescue is a success, the Chess Saint will have immense gratitude for you and will be sure to reward you handsomely, Palace Lord Yi. I'm, of course, willing, but since the Chess Saint has chosen you, I'm sure that it naturally means that he trusts you and the Shihua Sacred Mountain more. My plane level is still low, and the barren state lacks mighty ones as well. I'm afraid that we cannot be of much help," Yi Futian replied humbly. Lu Zong took a good look at Yi Futian and nodded lightly. "If the opportunity presents itself, I do wish that you will be able to help us out, Palace Lord Yi. At the very least, be it me or Shihua Sacred Mountain, we look forward to your performance, and we do not wish to see ourselves at opposing sides with you, Palace Lord Yi." He finished and left with a smile. All of the Chess Saint students walked past Yi Futian. Jiao Gongzi walked up to Yi Futian and patted his shoulder, leaving with a bitter smile. He was an acquaintance of Yi Futian back at the Chess Saint Villa, and he was not hoping to see both of them standing at opposing sides. However, both he and Yi Futian knew what Lu Zong meant. If the Tombkeeper village had indeed chosen Yi Futian and his group to be the successor, as speculated by many outside, then what Lu Zong and the people of Shihua Sacred Mountain were required to do would definitely clash with Yi Futian's objective. It would then be inevitable for them to be on opposing sides. Lu Zong was simply persuading Yi Futian at a roundabout manner. Yi Futian saw them leave, and Yaya showed up behind him. A tinge of worry was seen in his eyes. That was precisely the reason. The thing that she worried would happen happened, and that motivated her to persuade Yi Futian to leave. While she did not know much, she was nonetheless capable of sensing the simplest of dangers, just like how she was able to sense that both Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were genuinely nice to her. A sound of something streaking through the air was heard from afar. Yi Futian lifted his head and saw silhouettes appearing in various corners in the air. Furthermore, they appeared in groups of 10s. They looked down and saw Yi Futian. Someone among them asked, "So he's Yi Futian, the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State?" "Indeed." Someone nodded. "We'll spar for a bit when we have the chance," someone said to Yi Futian from the air before quickly disappearing from sight. Palace Lord Yi Futian and Yu Sheng of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State had both become incredibly renowned figures after the Nine State Forum. Even geniuses from all sacred grounds of the Nine States had at least heard of them. Not many participated in the Nine State Forum, and many from the sacred grounds who showed up did not participate in the Nine State Forum. As such, they were all very curious about the group from the Barren State. But then again, their goal for this trip was not Yi Futian. They were there for the Nether Sword Mound. Yi Futian continued to hear many more zipping about in the sky after those other groups left. More and more people showed up in the village. It seems that they will be working at the same time, Futian said in a low voice. He knew many from all over the 9 states would show up. However, most of them were only present outside the village, and there were few who came to look at what happened at the village. That day, however, it became obvious that someone was taking the lead, and many from sacred grounds all over the 9 states began moving into the village en masse, no longer hiding their presence. Bright lights dazzled in the air, and Futian looked up. He saw a phoenix carriage arriving and knew right away where those people came from. It was the Golden Phoenix Army of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. The phoenix designs on their clothes were incredibly dazzling and eye-catching. "Halt," someone from the carriage said, and the army halted. An elegantly dressed youth turned around and asked, "What is it, Z?" "I saw a familiar face. I'm going to take a look." Zhou Zi walked out of the carriage, and Futian turned his head at her direction. "What is this woman up to now?" Zhou Ya, Zhou Yu, and Zhou Zichao were all on that carriage in the air as well. Their expressions all seemed cold, looking at Futian. A youth with powerful aura on the carriage asked, "He is?" "Futian," Zhou Ya answered. That youth's expression turned incredibly sharp. "So that is him." Zhou Zi descended from above and stood right above Futian. The people of the barren state all came to Futian's side seeing the scene, sweeping their eyes at the Golden Phoenix Army in the air. "Why are you here at Tombkeeper Village?" Zhou Zi looked down and asked Futian. "What does that have to do with you?" Futian answered with a puzzled look. "Hasn't this woman learned anything?" "It indeed has nothing to do with me, but a word of advice nonetheless. While you people performed admirably in the 9-state forum, the barren state is still the barren state. That event represents nothing here. Whatever you're up to, it's best to act according to your ability." Zhou Zi flew up as soon as she was done talking. Xihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty were discussing a marriage alliance. Lu Zong was to marry a princess from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, and that princess would most certainly be her. Lu Zong shouldered the expectations of 3 major forces: Xihua Sacred Mountain, the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, and the Chess Saint Villa. He alone almost represented more than half of the eastern state. He was unable to afford to lose on this trip. According to what Zhou Zi knew, the chess game at the Chess Saint Villa had something to do with the Nether Sword Mound. As such, Futian, who had broken the Celestial Dragon chess game before, became a variable in this case. It was for that very reason that she reminded Futian to act according to his ability. Futian was still unworthy of fighting with Lu Zong over anything. Chapter 805. The people of the barren state glared at Zhou Zi leaving with cold expressions. The people of the barren state glared at Zhou Zi leaving with cold expressions. Zhou Zi had indeed sounded very overbearing. They all knew what Zhou Zi meant by those words. She wanted Futian to back out and stay out of the competition, regardless if he was the designated successor of the Tombkeeper village. The barren state was still the barren state. Regardless of how well they performed in the 9-state forum, they were, at the moment, unworthy of the fight at hand. Yusheng swept the Golden Phoenix Army in the air with cold eyes. He grew to resent Zhou Zi immensely back in the Chess Saint Villa. Despite being repeatedly humiliated, she had no intention of toning down her abrasive, arrogant attitude. Futian watched on with cold eyes. She had probably only been able to do what she did due to the backing from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. He understood as well that Zhou Zi's words were not without reason. Regardless of how well the barren state performed in the 9-state forum, the barren state was still the barren state and nothing had changed. The Holy Ji Palace of the barren state would remain the weakest sacred ground in all of the 9 states until they had a saint among them. Even though many great figures admired the students of the barren state, and many had even extended invitations to Yusheng and Su Ke to become students of saints, but that was hardly more than just admiration. Be it Xihua Sacred Mountain, the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, or any other sacred grounds for that matter, none of their people cared if he was the one chosen by the Tombkeeper village. It was as if he had been automatically ignored. We are all here and there is no more time to comprehend the diagrams. Let's go then. Futian stepped out and went in that same direction. They were heading to where the chief was. Futian and his people arrived before the chief moments later. Many mighty ones had gathered there. A good number of them were from sacred grounds, and mighty ones were aplenty. Some among them even exuded powerful auras. Many villagers were there as well, gathering around the village chief and looking at the outside guests with cold eyes. The chief said that this scuffle had the survival of Tombkeeper Village on the line. It was possible that their village would have no longer exist after this. Many spared a look at Yi Futian when he came. The very eye-catching palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State was there earlier than all of them. They were curious to see if he would choose to resign or to fight by them. Zhou Zi had a cold look in her eyes seeing Yi Futian and his people arrive. So, they are prepared to fight Lu Zong over this? Elder, I hope you'll be able to help us out in this, Lu Zong said to the village chief. It's not that I don't want to help. Tombkeeper Village has been around since the Nether Sword Mound existed. We do not interfere with the affairs of those who choose to enter the Sword Mound. You are all to try your luck in the Sword Mound, and there is no reason for us to interfere. I'm sorry to say that I can't be of help to what you propose, the village chief replied calmly. There is no need to be so humble, elder. I know from the chess saint that he had witnessed people of Tombkeeper Village train within the Nether Sword Mound. I'm certain that the people from all 9 states have been careless enough not to notice that the people of Tombkeeper Village have always been the protectors of the Nether Sword Mound. Lu Zong continued, since you're the protectors, I'm sure you know the place like the back of your hand. As such, you will definitely be of help. Tombkeeper Village has always been here. While we do have knowledge of the Sword Mound, we do not know the place like the back of our hand, as you put it. Many of you have sent people to look at how things are in the village after the 9-state forum, and I'm certain that you know a thing or two about the village, the chief said coldly. It was apparent that he knew well that sacred grounds of the 9 states had been keeping a close eye on Tombkeeper Village. Furthermore, many of those people had gotten there earlier than Yi Futian. Since all of them had speculated that the village was probably about to choose a successor, there was simply no way they would sit by and do nothing while the lineage of the Sword Mound fell into the hands of others. If Yi Futian had made a move earlier, they would have acted earlier as well. The Nether Sword Mound is within the eastern state, and both Xihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty placed a lot of importance on it. Furthermore, the chess saint is also trapped within. I'm sure that you know how much that means to the eastern state as a whole, so we have to be cautious with the matter, Lu Zong said. Yaya came to the village chief's side and looked at Lu Zong and the others, saying, Why do you think you have the right to force the village chief to do something for you? Lu Zong looked at Yaya with a peculiar sheen in his eyes. The old village chief had taken Yaya to participate in the 9-state forum, and the girl had been able to become number 2 of the event at the tender age of 15. Her top-notch talent and her monstrous performance were probably due to training in the Sword Mound. She is probably very important to Tombkeeper Village, no? If the chief is unwilling, it is best that we do not pursue the matter further. However, we would like to ask for guides to lead us into the Nether Sword Mound. I'm sure the village chief would not oppose that? Lu Zong asked. Who would you like to be your guide? The chief looked at Lu Zong. Yaya has immense talent, and I like her. She will be one of the candidates. Other than that, I have heard that Ying and Ho are also very capable people among the younger generations of Tombkeeper Village. I'd like them to join as well, Lu Zong added. You've really done your research? The village chief smiled. Lu Zong had chosen the best 3 young people in the village. Can't do. A voice was heard, and everyone turned their eyes around. They all looked at the one who spoke. It was none other than Yi Futian. Lu Zong turned his eyes around and smiled, saying to Yi Futian, What do you mean by that, Palace Lord Yi? I mean you can't have Yaya as your guide, Yi Futian answered. Why not? Lu Zong asked. She's my little sister and she'll be going into the Nether Sword Mound with me, Yi Futian answered calmly. Lu Zong stared at Yi Futian. That was a clear statement that meant Yi Futian intended to enter the Sword Mound as well. The people of the sacred grounds looked amused. So the Barren State people are going to fight over her with Lu Zong? A cold glare was seen in Zhou Zi's eyes. It was apparent that he had not listened to her words. So, you did not hear what I said to you earlier? Zhou Zi looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian spared a glance at Zhou Zi and asked, Who are you again? You. Zhou Zi's eyes turned bone-chillingly cold. What place were you in the Nine-State Forum? Zhuge Mingyue, who was standing beside Zhou Zi, glared at the princess as she asked coldly. Zhou Zi became embarrassed immediately. She lost to Hua Jiyu in the very first battle and was eliminated right away in the Nine-State Forum. While the Barren State is indeed weak, we have the number one of the event among us. So, who are you to talk like that to the palace lord of a sacred ground of the Barren State? Zhuge Mingyue smirked coldly at Zhou Zi and said, if you're doing so as the princess of the great Zhou sacred dynasty, I'd advise you, princess, to be careful of your actions. It is best that you not throw your weight around despite not having the power to back your action. You risk embarrassing the great Zhou sacred dynasty by doing so. You. Zhou Zi looked increasingly frustrated. So this bitch is humiliating me now? Then who are you to speak to the princess of the great Zhou sacred dynasty in such a manner? Someone of formidable training from the great Zhou sacred dynasty walked out and glared at Zhuge Mingyue coldly. Zhuge Qingfeng, the sword saint, and Gu Donglu all walked up at the same time. Zhuge Mingyue smiled and said, as the elder sister of the palace lord of a sacred ground of the Barren State. You have any problem with that? Yi Futian quietly watched from the side without doing anything to stop his second sister. Zhou Zi indeed needed to be taught some manners. She was arrogant and lacked tact in her way with people. She was far inferior to Lu Zong in that regard. Yi Futian, of course, knew that the sacred king of the sacred dynasty did not like him much, but he was not concerned enough to fear offending some members of the younger generation of the great Zhou sacred dynasty, like Zhou Zi. Should I just be listening to every word Zhou Zi is going to tell me? Yi Futian thought to himself, amused. Furthermore, since he had decided to enter the Nether Sword Mound, there were some people whom he deemed necessary to offend. The Nether Sword Mound is undoubtedly within the Eastern State, but it is still a place of the 9 states. Its existence said that it belongs to no one and no force. Many people from many sacred grounds are here for it now, and we of the Barren State are no different. If Saint Shihua and the Sacred King are here today, forbidding everyone else but you people from entering the Sword Mound, then I shall give up. Yi Futian then continued calmly, or else, we of the Barren State will enter the Nether Sword Mound. Someone like Saint Shihua and the Sacred King would not have said something like that in the first place. As such, Yi Futian made his stance firmly and forcefully. The Barren State would enter the Sword Mound. The old village chief watched everything from the side, quietly. He was very satisfied with Yi Futian's attitude. The chess saint had entered the Nether Sword Mound and had spread the news of its existence, attracting the attention of sacred grounds from all 9 states. That was why he needed to make preparations in advance, and that was why he had someone participate in the 9-state forum. It was fortunate for him to not only encounter Yu Xing but Yi Futian as well. Yi Futian played a key role in his plans. Furthermore, Yi Futian played said role in a splendid, even perfect, manner. The place turned silent all of a sudden. Many from Tombkeeper village looked at Yi Futian and grew to like him more. Yi Futian was standing up to protect Yaya, preventing Lu Zong and the others from taking her. If Palace Lord Yi wants to try, I see no problem with it. A voice was heard, and many turned around to see Lu Zong say, I do not mind Yaya going into the sword mound with Palace Lord Yi. You have also broken the Celestial Dragon chess game at the Chess Saint Villa, so I'm sure you are very adept in matrices. I think it'd be splendid to have you come along into the Nether Sword Mound. Maybe we all will have something waiting for us within. Lu Zong finished and turned to face the village chief, saying, What do you think, elder? All right, since you want someone from Tombkeeper village to show you the way within, I hereby allow Ing, Ho, and Yaya to take all of you into the sword mound. But I have to remind you that the dangers lying within are not something that they're capable of handling, the chief elaborated. I understand, and I have no intentions of troubling them, Lu Zong smiled and said. In that case, better make a move then. The village chief turned and said, I'll send all of you into the sword mound personally. What awaits any of you within is up to you. Beware that the sword mound is not a friendly place, so please do keep your guard up at all times. Thank you for reminding us, Lu Zong replied. He then followed the village chief with his entourage behind, walking in the same direction. Yaya came to stand beside Yi Futian and glanced at him. Yi Futian patted her shoulder and said, "Relax, I'm here." "Yeah." Yaya nodded lightly. All of them arrived at the back of the village and kept walking. The shadows of the mountains shrouded the ground between them. There was no sunlight to be found. The place was incredibly cold, just like a graveyard. Many stood outside and looked at the graveyard before them, feeling a chilling cold seeping into their bones. They could not help but shivered. There was also a faint, sharp aura seeping out of the place. The shadows before them stretched far, and no one was able to see to their end. Even their spiritual will was blocked out in that place. This is the forbidden ground, the Nether Sword Mound. Countless swords were buried and hidden within. "Please remember to be careful," the old man reminded everyone and looked forward with a cold expression. He seemed to be able to see into the terrifying sword matrix deep within the sword mound, as well as the very core of the place itself. A figure sat right there, trapped by extremely fearsome sword matrices. A blood-colored sword was stabbed into the ground, with a terrifying storm whirling around, capable of tearing everything in its path apart. At the very moment, the figure opened his eyes all of a sudden and looked sharp. The one that he had chosen had arrived. Chapter 806. Many from sacred grounds all over the 9 states arrived outside the Nether Sword Mound and finally entered. Many from sacred grounds all over the 9 states arrived outside the Nether Sword Mound and finally entered. "Someone from Tombkeeper Village, please lead the way," a mighty one from the Hall of Holy Light said. This time, it was more than just Yaya, Ing, and some others coming in. There were also many elders from the village who were with them. 2 elders nodded and took the lead. One of them said, "The Nether Sword Mound is filled with danger. One misstep could lead to your death, and not even saints would be spared from such a fate. Anyone who is not adept in the matrices should not enter. If any one of you is not proficient in the art of matrices, it is not too late to back out now. It's fine. If we run into any danger, we believe that the people of Tombkeeper Village will have ways to get us out," a mighty one from Daluo's Sacred Mountain said coldly. That was the very reason they insisted on having people of the village inside the sword mound. "Be careful," Yaya stood beside Yi Futian and reminded him. He nodded, and everyone stepped into the dark place, feeling increasingly cold as if a formless cold wind was everywhere around them. The cold wind had the sharpness of swords. "Whose graves would these be?" someone asked. They passed by a graveyard as they walked. "The followers of the Sword Saint of the Void are all buried here. This is what Tombkeeper Village has been protecting all this while," the elder leading the way answered. "Is it? Then what lies within the depths of the sword mound?" someone from Chi clan asked. It was apparent that they did not believe what that elder said completely. "You're telling me that the people of Tombkeeper Village trained here for years, away from the outside world, just to look after a graveyard? Who's going to buy that? Unknown. We've never ventured deep into the sword mound. No one has been able to go that far." The village chief said that the body of the Sword Saint of the Void was buried there. "It is said to be a terrifying place out to kill anyone who disturbs the Sword Saint of the Void's slumber," another answered. Many mighty ones from sacred grounds frowned. "These people have been going on about terrifying dangers and little else. Are they trying to dissuade us from going further? According to my knowledge, the chess saint saw the Nether Sword Mound personally, and there were people from the village training within. May I ask what that is?" Lu Zong asked plainly. "That is not considered to be the deeper part just yet. It is said that the deepest part of the sword mound has sword aura originating from the void, capable of tearing space itself. There is also a blood-colored crevice with powers to destroy everything," the villager answered. The old man kept repeating the horrifying things to be found within, and even the ones from sacred grounds found things to be eerie. Furthermore, they were able to sense the growing, unforgiving cold coming from the grave, and that made them feel anxious. However, they were still mighty people who came from sacred grounds. Their minds were stable enough to not back out so easily. There had never been such a massive attempt by sacred grounds of the 9 states at venturing into the Nether Sword Mound. They deemed it necessary to reveal the secrets lying within. They knew that Lu Zong and the people of Shihua Sacred Mountain had concerns about the place. As such, they did not choose to simply venture into the sword mound on their own and had instead spread news to inform other sacred grounds. But at the same time, they deemed the attempt to be too important to miss. It could prove to be some turning point after all. All of them had ventured rather deep into the sword mound after a while. They were no longer able to see the village when they turned around. Their spiritual powers had no way of penetrating into the place, which was a sure sign that they were already inside the nether sword mound. The number of graves grew, and a sword was found sticking into each and every one of them in an orderly, neat manner. The unforgiving coldness had grown more intense as well. There were many who even became able to vaguely feel the aura of rules about, as if the sword mound had such inherent power of rules in it, instead of merely having spiritual qi. Lu Zong did not lie. The inside of the sword mound was indeed a sacred training ground like none other. No rule matrices laid in the outside world were even able to compare with the training conditions present in the sword mound. Furthermore, the aura of rules grew increasingly clear as they ventured deeper into the place. There were even different wills of rules of different natures found within. What happens if we were to take flight? Someone asked. We're now inside the matrix's area. Anyone who dares take flight will surely die, someone from the village said. Beware, something is coming. Someone from the Tombkeeper village lifted their head and saw a killing will descend upon them all of a sudden. Dazzling lights burst, and streaks of sword aura fell on them like rains of swords. Everyone looked up and guarded themselves. Be careful, Futian said in a low voice. Countless dazzling swords descended straight from above, stabbing into the ground. Everyone dodged. Sword will filled the air around, and ringing noises of swords were heard. The ground in that vast space became filled with swords, surrounding all of them within. A dazzling picture appeared in the air, shrouding the place below. Boundless sword will rained down from the picture, resonating with the swords on the ground, making the sword will increasingly strong. A sword diagram. Futian's eyes sparkled, knowing that a matrix had appeared. We're now within a sword matrix, and all of you should be able to sense it by now. The sword matrix is gathering power continuously. The further we go from here, the greater the killing power of the sword matrix, and the greater of the difficulty of breaking said matrix. When the power of the sword matrix reaches a certain point, there will be no way of breaking the matrix, so long as one has insufficient training. Even if one were to find a way to do so, they would die as a result, the people of Tombkeeper Villager reminded. The greater training a master of matrices had, the better their chances at survival. So what if I were to forcefully barge outside? A mighty one of the Hall of Holy Light asked arrogantly. They were able to sense that the power of the sword matrix was not strong enough just yet, and they wondered what would happen if they were to force themselves out. You're welcome to try, the elder from the village replied calmly. Lu Zong looked up at the air above him. What was depicted in the sword diagram was indeed identical to the images that the chess saint had sent him. The chess saint had adapted the sword matrix into his art of chess. There were few in the 9 states who had an understanding of matrices on par with him. Follow my lead to break the matrix, Lu Zong said and acted to break the matrix. All 9 students of the chess saint followed his lead. They were all masters at matrices and knew such matrices well. It was only natural that they were the ones to break the matrix before them. Don't make any sudden moves, Futian said to Wuchen, who was right behind him. Wuchen, I'll do it per the way of chess. You put your shredding rules where I drop the pieces. Will do. Wuchen nodded. A brilliant light appeared behind Futian, and a chessboard appeared. The projection appeared above the matrix and was overlaid right on top of it. The countless swords looked as if they were stabbed into the chessboard itself, corresponding the way of chess. Furthermore, everyone was able to vaguely see that the swords of the matrix turned to look like symbols saying kill. The killing sword matrix. The chess spirit. Lu Zong glanced at Futian, and all 9 students of the chess saint looked surprised. Futian did not unleash the chess spirit at the chess saint villa back then, but he was able to break the celestial dragon chess game nonetheless. Yang Zhao's expression brightened. If his teacher were looking for a successor, No one would have been more suitable than Yi Futian. However, his teacher was not simply looking for a successor, he was looking to escape the sword mound. Yi Futian willed and many chess pieces dropped onto the board. Yi Wuchen waved his hand almost at the same time, dropping countless swords of rules on the spots where Yi Futian placed his pieces. When all of the swords appeared, a symbol was surprisingly shown, saying break. Wuchen, get on with it, Yi Futian said. Yi Wuchen's mind was still like the surface of a mirror, bringing will power of the sword to bear with his will. The swords turned into a terrifying matrix of destruction in an instant, clashing with the killing matrix. A terrifying storm whipped up in the air, and two symbols, the kill and the break symbols, seemed to have clashed with each other. A dazzling light flashed. The kill symbol was dissipated, and the swords before Yi Futian and the others disappeared altogether. A path appears instead. Let's go, Yi Futian stepped forward and moved. What incredible speed! Many looked on, feeling impressed. Have you memorized it? Someone from other sacred grounds asked, attempting to mimic Yi Futian's way of breaking the matrix. Every single sacred ground had dispatched masters at matrixes on the trip to the Nether Sword Mound. None of them had come unprepared. Indeed, those who were proficient in matrices all nodded and mimicked Yi Futian's way of breaking the matrix. They too were able to quickly break the matrices before them. Go after them, someone said and chased after Yi Futian. Lu Zong and his people were also done breaking the matrix before them. They glanced forward and moved. The aura of rules grew somewhat more intense after breaking the sword matrices. But at the same time, the killing will grew more intense as well. Everyone from the sacred grounds knew that they had stepped into the Nether Sword Mound, and they were fighting the place they were in. The second sword matrix appeared soon, and Yi Futian was able to still easily break it. The third and fourth followed. Everyone was somewhat startled, but they followed Yi Futian closely nonetheless. It became apparent that Yi Futian seemed to be more reliable than the people from Toonkeeper Village. Yi Futian might have gotten the ways of breaking the matrix from the village chief. Yi Futian had been able to easily break the 9 matrices back in Chess Saint Villa last year, and he then went on to break the Celestial Dragon chess game as well. He was given the sword diagrams by the village chief. Chapter 807. Yi Futian and his companions had breached 8 matrices and finally penetrated the Nether Sword Mound. No one was killed and no one was injured, and all the sacred lands were represented by matrix sorcerers, who followed Yi Futian to breach the matrix. It was without difficulty, and they moved easily within this restricted area. Yi Futian and his companions had breached 8 matrices and finally penetrated the Nether Sword Mound. No one was killed and no one was injured, and all the sacred lands were represented by matrix sorcerers, who followed Yi Futian to breach the matrix. It was without difficulty, and they moved easily within this restricted area. At the moment, the sky was even dimmer in the space they were in. Inside, it seemed to be somewhat different from the outside world, as if it was an independent space. This area was populated with whiffs of different rules, extremely rich ones at that. If one was to comprehend and cultivate here, as long as the talent was fair, it would definitely be easy to break into the Sage Plane. This realization made the hearts of many from sacred lands quiver. Certainly after returning from this place, it would be a priority to take over its control. It would be an ideal sacred land for cultivation. As Yi Futian walked along, he breached 8 matrices. If assumed correctly, one more breach, and they should be entering the core of the Nether Sword Mound. Chess Saint Villa contained 10 matrices, with 10 sword diagrams. The last matrix was known as the final analysis, meaning that there would be 9 sword matrices in front, with 1 left. Everyone be careful. There may be one last sword matrix before the real Nether Sword Mound is revealed, Lu Zong said. He reckoned that everything they passed until now was just the cemetery outside the Nether Sword Mound, and they had not yet arrived at their true destination. The real Nether Sword Mound could very possibly be behind the last sword matrix. This restricted area is known as a most deadly place, but so far it looks like nothing special, said a young cultivator from the Hall of Holy Light. They had breached 8 matrices, and so far, everyone was all right. Just then Futian came to a halt and waved to everyone to stop them from moving forward. A brilliant light abruptly flashed from the ground, and a pattern appeared brightly. Then, from the darkened earth, an eye-catching blade of light arose. Zing! Ahead of them, a sword emerged from the ground, thrust into the earth, blooming terrible sword will. "Watch your feet," Futian cautioned. By now, there were dazzling blade of lights blazing everywhere, and swords rising continuously from the ground, sweeping the place with terrible sword will. Everyone evaded and jumped, shifting and changing positions immediately when they felt the sword will underneath their feet. Out of nowhere and in no time, there were countless swords in the ground. They turned into a terrifying sword matrix, surrounding everyone. Above the firmament, there was a sword diagram projected downward, but this time, the sword upon the diagram was flowing madly, constantly changing positions. Changeable sword matrix, Futian glanced at the sword matrix above the void. This sword matrix was still evolving from the other 9 sword diagrams, but it was continuously modifying the 9 sword diagrams. It was elusive. The difficulty of breaching the matrix had increased exponentially. "Jiu, will to connect." Futian said, "Release your spiritual energy and listen to my commands." Hua Jiu understood Futian's intention immediately, and her spirit crown bloomed. Instantly, a surge of invisible telekinetic power transformed into countless invisible silk threads, moving toward everyone. At the same time, everyone released their own spiritual energy and did not block the invasion of Hua Jiu's telekinesis power. Soon, everyone's spiritual energy seemed to be linked together through Hua Jiu's will. They emptied their minds, waiting to receive Futian's commands. Will to connect was a special technique of Hua Jiu's. Futian was also capable of it, but needed to rely on the sounds of Guqin. No need for Futian to speak, but with the turning of his mind, everyone understood him instantly. The group dispersed their positions, and the aura of rules dispersed from them. In Futian's mind, the spirit chessboard emerged, projecting everything from the outside onto the board, using it to breach the matrix. The eyes of everyone else from the other holy lands were focused on Futian and his companions. All they could see was that everyone was moving, and the rule powers animated in different directions. Within the sword matrix, there appeared many other different, interconnecting matrices. Lu Zong glanced with disinterest, then said to the 9 disciples of the chess saint, who were around him, "We should also set about breaching the matrix. This one is different from the ones before. Imitating him won't work." Yang Shao and the rest were master matrix sorcerers. They understood that for this particular sword matrix, with its ceaseless evolutions, everyone would face different, constantly changing sword matrix. But for the other holy lands, some were still imitating the actions of Futian's. Some master matrix sorcerers quickly realized the problem. You need to breach it on your own. Before they could react, those from the barren state had already formed the matrix where they stood, with Futian in the middle, like a divine tree, and those from the barren state, branches and leaves that spread from the divine tree. Some branches and leaves turned into sharp swords, while others turned into swaggering broadswords, and some even became demonic shadows that shrouded all things. From different directions, they began to advance forward, constantly interrupting the sword matrix, slowly pushing into the area canvassed by the sword matrix. The swords screamed, shattered, and were destroyed bit by bit. Many watched Futian and his companions break through the area covered by the sword matrix, then walk out. The positions of the cultivators of the Hall of Holy Light changed constantly, but the sword will that surrounded them became stronger and stronger, intertwined with the sword diagram suspended in the void, forming an unbreakable stronghold. "How is it?" someone asked the master matrix sorcerer in the center. "It's troublesome. The matrix is constantly changing." The master matrix sorcerer seemed strained. Many staffs materialized and were setting up the matrix as well, but the matrix of the staffs was swallowed up gradually, some were even ripped apart by the sword chi. "At our speed, we should be able to penetrate the sword matrix," a cultivator said. As he stepped forward, a dazzling brilliance burst forth from his body. It was the rule power of light. As soon as he finished, a sharp radiance flashed across his eyes, and he turned into a beam of light and disappeared, rushing forward between the gaps of the sword matrix. The sword matrix that surrounded the front gave forth a light screen, cutting through the expanse, blocking him from moving further. But the cultivator from the Hall of Holy Light threw a punch forward and suddenly broke through the sword veil as a charging lightning. But at this moment, the sword diagram that hung in the void abruptly exploded into great radiance. Countless swords shot up from the ground on his path, instantly covering the void. Witnessing this scene, many cultivators from the Hall of Holy Lights changed their expressions. Someone shouted, "Be careful, big brother." Just as he finished, above the sword diagram in the void, a light disappeared, and all that was left of it was just a residual shadow. Zing! With a crisp sound, everyone saw a sword falling from the sky, plunging into the other's body, nailing him to the ground. The next instant, endless sword will ruptured and tore him to pieces until nothing was left. Those who witnessed this scene now understood the reason why so many who had ventured into the restricted area and perished at the Nether Sword Mound had left no traces. People from the Hall of Holy Light only felt a coldness. The sword diagram in the void contained the real horror. You were warned not to try to force your way through the sword matrix. Unless you belong to a holy land, you may give it a try, someone from Tombkeeper Village said up ahead. You come and breach this matrix, the cultivator from the Hall of Holy Light said, looking at them with razor-sharp focus. When we are here, we can't protect ourselves either. The matrix here is just as difficult for us. People from Tombkeeper Village did not bother with the request, as they were also figuring out a way to breach the matrix. Those from the Hall of Holy Light looked worried. Not long ago, some among them had thought that the Nether Sword Mound had a hollow reputation, but at this moment, they were trapped within. The power of the matrix is getting stronger, some cultivators of Holy Land said. As time went on, the power of the matrix would only become stronger until even when they had ways to breach the matrix, they would be unable to do so. The Nether Sword Mound was located at the junction of Summer State, Chi State, Feng State, and Eastern State. Therefore, the holy lands of these four states were almost all present. Coupled with those from Barren State, there were the strongest of the 5 states gathered here. But now, all the holy lands were trapped. Yaya looked at Futian. Futian returned the look. "What are you looking at me for?" "Big brother," Yaya cried out. "You won." Futian hurled the words at her and was gone in a flash. He turned around, heading towards the matrix of Tombkeeper Village. He actually was able to walk straight into the matrix from the outside. "What are you doing in here?" Ing swept a sideways glance at Futian. Futian glanced at him nonchalantly, then looked at the others. "I will lead you to breach the matrix. Its power is increasing, we have to be quick." Yes, the people of Tombkeeper Village nodded. They all knew that this young man was chosen by the village chief. "No need," Ing said coldly, looking on edge, but Futian ignored him and began to lead the people to breach the matrix. It didn't take long for the matrix to be cracked, and the people of Tombkeeper Village reached safety. "Thank you so much," an elder thanked Futian. "My pleasure," Futian replied casually. "We could have breached the matrix without him." Ing gave Futian another sideways glance. The people of Tombkeeper Village looked at Ing and knew that this guy was prejudiced against Futian. Being the second most talented person in Tombkeeper Village, besides Yaya, the village chief chose Futian instead of him to inherit the sword diagram, and this rubbed Ing the wrong way. Just then, screams could be heard intermittently. Within the sword matrix, there were people continuously losing their lives. Futian looked back and shuddered inside. These were all people from the Holy Lands, who were powerful in their own right in the outside world. But now, they had lost their lives here, perishing without a trace. At this juncture, a group of people dashed out of the sword matrix. It was Lu Zong and his party, the people of Shihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Dynasty. When Futian saw this, he couldn't help but be surprised. These two major forces seemed to have united together, and in addition to the 9 disciples of the Chess Saint, that was equivalent to 3 holy lands of the Eastern State. Glass Saint and Sky Saint did not participate, therefore all the power of the Eastern State was on Lu Zong's side. At this time, a dreadful aura descended. Futian looked in that direction and saw blinding beams of light bursting out. The next moment, a line of figures forced its way through the matrix. In the midst of the void, a terrible slaughtering sword exploded from the sky. It was a sword that could slaughter everything. However, beams of rays pierced the sky and turned into a sword of holy light that went straight to heaven and penetrated the void. It collided with the slaughtering sword. Afterward, both disappeared, and a storm of destruction raging above the firmament. Next, a group of people scrambled out of the scope of the sword matrix, away from the confines of the sword diagram. They were the cultivators of the Hall of Holy Light. They reappeared unhinged and flustered. One of them held a sword, whose blade bloomed immense glory. A holy sword. Forcible breach. Futian revealed an air of surprise. This was to disregard the balance of the sword matrix and forcing a way out with the help of a divine implement. However, by the look of it, the Hall of Holy Light paid a heavy price and lost almost half of its people. After that, all holy lands came out one after the other. Xia Clan, 9 State College, Jixia Holy Palace, Qi Clan, and Yu Clan were all able to breach the matrix. Clearly, there were true masters of matrices among them. Other holy lands, like the Hall of Holy Light, forced their way out. For the latter, they suffered heavy losses, and many cultivators lost their lives within the matrix. Even those who were able to breach the matrix had lost their people in the process. Everyone had a terrible look on their faces. They had speculated that this matrix was the last one before reaching the heart of Nether Sword Mound, but it was also here that they paid a painful price. If it was as they thought, they should have reached the heart of the Nether Sword Mound by now. An extremely chilled air enveloped everyone. Upon the land, as far as the eye could see, there was nothing but swords. It seemed that this was Sword Mound, the place where swords were buried. "Let's go," someone said. Futian, also looking forward, started heading that way. This time, they walked for a long time, and in the great boundless land, there was an endless sword. "I feel the power of space rules," some cultivator commented. "Indeed, it's the power of space rules." Someone nodded. "How familiar," next to Futian, Yaya whispered under her breath. Why did she feel this place to be so familiar, as if she had been here before? Even though she had cultivated at the Nether Sword Mound, she had never traveled so deep inside to such place. When she was a child, she had asked the village chief what was there, but the village chief told her that she would know when she grew up. Someone looked up ahead. Many slowed down, and some even stopped altogether. Their hearts trembled wildly. Not only were their swords thrust into the ground, but in the sky above, there were also countless swords hanging and pointing directly below, as if aimed toward them. Moreover, there was the immense sword wolf flowing above, as if this was the place of the real horror. Those who were at the top of the realm of the Sage Plane actually felt sick at the moment. Right then, there was a power that made them fearful. Futian's heart also pounded. He slowed down but continued to move forward. In the distance, besides the swords that were hanging from the sky, he saw a glimmer of brilliance, alluringly bloody and shocking to behold. It was like a sword, but it somehow resembled a sword eye. The sword will that coursed continuously between heaven and earth seemed to have originated from there. Yu Sheng and Hua Jiyu both cast a glance at Yaya, and their eyes flashed a sharp spark. They had seen the same scenario when they fought Yaya. "Look there," someone pointed towards the distance. What they saw made everyone's heart beat violently. "Master!" Yang Shao and other 9 disciples hailed. Chapter 808. Everyone who was there looked in that direction, and it was a terrifying scenario. Everyone who was there looked in that direction, and it was a terrifying scenario. Above the firmament, there was an incredibly dreadful matrix diagram, shielding the sky. Endless sword will came falling down, and there were terrifying swords from the void above to the earth below, as far as the eye could see. There were 9 ancient nether swords, each about 100 meters high, that traversed between heaven and earth, slamming down. It was a super tenacious sword matrix that reached the sky, and underneath it, the figure of Chess Saint was trapped within. Around his body, there seemed to be millions of chess pieces distributed in every corner of that world. Each piece contained appalling power, equivalent to that of a sword. A great and boundless chessboard floated within the expanse, with Chess Saint sitting upon the chessboard. His body was 100 meters tall, akin to a statue of an ancient god in situ, but unable to move, as if with the slightest carelessness he would meet his end. Even more frightening was that the sword will within the sword diagram seemed to be without end, with a constant flow of sword will pouring downward that rendered its power stronger and stronger. Chess Saint was able to utilize the strength of Saint Plane to set up a superstructure to keep himself from being annihilated by the sword matrix. However, the longer it went, even a saint would be exhausted eventually and die inside the matrix. People from all the Holy Lands were shaken to the core. Truly, even a strong practitioner of the Saint Plane was trapped here, unable to extricate himself from such a predicament. Hence the pretext of sitting for a peaceful death was in fact all but a cry for help. Yang Shao and his party of 9 stepped forward, but just then the chess saint opened his eyes. Though the eyes were still spirited and dazzling like that of the gods, there was now fatigue showing in them. "Stop," a voice said, like thunder in clear sky, causing Yang Shao and the others to stand still. "Look underneath your feet. Any further will cost you your lives," the voice of Chess Saint chimed again. Yang Shao and the others looked at each other solemnly and looked down. They then felt a wretched aura fostering. "Be careful." Yi Futian was working the freedom meditation that sharpened his perception greatly. He warned those around him as he sensed the impending danger. This place would be deadlier than all they had experienced before. People from all the Holy Lands were solemnly waiting. They had lost the ease they had previously when they were able to breeze through the past 8 matrices. The profound lesson they learned from the 9th sword matrix was still fresh in their memory. Chess Saint, who may be the most powerful master matrix sorcerer in all of the 9 states, had been trapped by this place, so it was not hard to conceive how mighty this sword matrix really was. "Look there." Someone followed the sword matrix that had trapped the chess saint and saw that the sword will, along with the sword diagram, were from the same origin, the bloody sword eye. A giant sword was inserted into the ground, and all about the sword there permeated an extremely ancient air, faintly smelling of blood, as if the sword had been stained with interminable gore. The sword will from the sword eye flowed to the giant sword, and the giant sword released the airflow of the endless way of the sword, where it went on to imbue the entire nether sword mound. Even the sword matrix that had trapped the chess saint seemed to be born out of that giant sword. Just then, a pair of frightening frosty gleams shot out from the sword, and everyone felt bone-chilling frigidity. They actually saw a pair of eyes. Eyes on the giant sword. In that instant, they felt that the sword was not just a sword but held life within it. "Is that sword alive or am I hallucinating?" someone whispered. "No, you are not," someone replied. Everyone's heart was beating wildly, and they felt they were being watched by a pair of eyes. Then, blades of light of incomparable splendor shone and bloomed, appearing in every corner around them. Where they stood was the location of the sword matrix. In the expanse above them, clouds were twisting and changing color. At the location of the bloody sword eye, endless streams of the way of the sword flowed in that void, as if to lock everyone in place. "Is it too late to quit now?" someone asked quite seriously. Many had the idea that this might be where they would bury their bones. At this point, someone took a step back. Just one step, and instantly it seemed to have caught the attention of the giant sword. In a moment he only felt a biting coldness piercing through him. An acute murderous intent had already locked onto him. Oops! A thought manifested in his mind, and his body instantly retreated. But above the void, in the slow-moving airflow of the way of the sword, a sword diagram suddenly materialized, and a sword plunged from the sky. Zing! The sword penetrated the void and slashed through thin air. The practitioner who belonged in the rank of Magi did not even have the chance to scream before he was nailed in place, and his body immediately torn to pieces by the sword chi. The hearts of people beat violently, and no one dared to move again, their feet firmly rooted in the ground. This sword matrix will not take the initiative to attack, but every step is an opportunity for a kill. One wrong step means death. Chess Saint eyed everyone, His voice came out of the sword matrix, sending chills to those who heard him. Every step was an opportunity for a kill. Perhaps Chess Saint also took the wrong step. Even a saint could be trapped by the sword matrix after taking the wrong step. Although he was not killed on the spot, neither could he leave, and if he did not get out soon, death was imminent. "Master, how can we help you to get out?" Young Shaoist. He was not concerned about his own safety, but that of the chess saint. "I have already transformed the sword matrix into a chess game. Help Lu Zong to take that sword." Chess saint eyes drifted toward the giant sword underneath the sword eyes. This sword rules all the sword matrices within the nether sword mound. Gain control of the sword, and the matrices may disappear. Yang Xiao and the others nodded. Back when they laid out the celestial dragon chess game to find the one who could solve it, they understood that whoever solved the game that the 9 of them had laid out would imply that person's chess ability surpassed them. So now that the master asked them to assist Lu Zong was not an unreasonable request. All 9 of them looked at Lu Zong and saw that a golden light bloomed behind him. There was the faint shadow of a golden Buddha that superimposed over him and then integrated as one with his body. His hands were together to form a Buddha's seal. It was a seal of wisdom. Suddenly, Lu Zong was able to understand all things on the outside world and gained a clearer understanding of the laws and the ways of the matrix within the universe. This matrix harbored the 8 trigrams and 5 elements of the ancient mystic of divination, concealing the way of heaven and earth, and have integrated all the ways of the matrix. You will need to use everything you have learned to breach the matrix. Do not throw your lives away. Chess Saint regarded Lu Zong deeply and said, "Lu Zong, you are in charge." "I will do everything I can," Lu Zong replied. He then took a step forward, and when the step fell, a dazzling blade of light appeared but then dimmed. The position was taken over by Lu Zong. All right, the eyes of many sparked. For this matrix, one wrong step meant death. And now, Lu Zong took a step with such confidence. It seemed that because he had solved the celestial dragon chess game cast by Chess Saint, he was already familiar with this matrix. The reason for his coming today was to breach the matrix. Gate of Life. Futian looked at the position where Lu Zong walked to and commented. He had cultivated diligently at the Chess Saint Villa to study the way of the matrix, so all this was familiar to him. Naturally, he recognized the step in the position that Lu Zong took was the Gate of Life in the mystic divination. "Uncle, the divinatory symbols can predict good or evil. If so, can't you also speculate if that step is the right one or not?" Futian asked Sage Wanxiang. They both stood in the same place, without moving. Simple predictions of good and evil are meaningless. For example, if the pace you take can avoid the evil, but what of it after? Even if it is auspicious, the entire layout can still collapse, because this is a matrix, after all. It's different than astrology. Sage Wanxiang continued, "Of course, we can also combine your matrix with my divination, and we will have a more certain chance of winning." Futian nodded. "The sword is moving, the matrix is constantly evolving. You are right, to breach it would require the overview of the whole picture and to control the overall situation. One good step means nothing. Even if you walked many steps safely, if, in the end, you could not breach it and get stuck, it would still be death." People from all the Holy Lands had not moved, or rather, they dare not move. In fact, they had truly experienced the danger of the place, and now, the thought of retreat was on their mind. But they were stuck in the middle, already in the midst of the matrix with no way to turn back. Finally, they understood why Nether Sword Mound was known as the most murderous place and that no one ever returned alive, unless it was someone like Lu Zong, who had been mentored by Chess Saint, who transformed Sword Matrix into a chess matrix and passed it on to him, therefore giving him the chance to retreat. For the rest of them, it was impossible. "You came too." Chess Saint, who was trapped by the Sword Matrix, looked at Futian. Futian looked up at that figure of the saint, enormous as the gods, and called out, "Sir?" He had entered the ancient hall of the Chess Saint to cultivate before, so it was natural that Chess Saint recognized him. "You cracked the celestial dragon chess game, so it's no wonder you can enter this place." Chess Saint continued, "You and Lu Zong joined forces, assisting him in breaching the matrix. If I get out of this one, I will not forget your role in it. Futian looked at the chess saint and responded, Lu Zong and I each have our own ideas about the solutions to the matrix, and they may be in conflict and cause confusion. But Lu Zong is unparalleled in the arts of the matrix and solved the celestial dragon chess game left by you, in addition to being your true successor. He will surely have the best chance to breach the matrix. I am here, respectfully awaiting your release. His voice was calm and there was no falseness in it. If he and Lu Zong were to breach and matrix together and they had a difference in opinion, who was to listen to whom? Would Lu Zong be willing to ask people from the barren state to give the breach a try? Because of this, it was impossible to join forces. And he was also sure that many would lose their lives in the process during Lu Zong's attempt to breach. Even so, the matrix was still a hard one to crack. That day at the Chess Saint Villa, Lu Zong was able to crack the celestial dragon chess game because Li Kaishan deliberately made a wrong move. If it were not so, it would still be unknown whether the celestial dragon chess game would have been solved. Now, the power of this sword matrix was obviously stronger than the celestial dragon chess game. The difficulty of breaking the matrix was greater, and there could be no mistakes. A false step would cost a person's life. Under the circumstances, it would be impossible to make such a promise to Chess Saint, to disregard the lives of the people of the barren state in order to save Chess Saint. Even if Futian were to breach the matrix himself, if he was without confidence, he would retreat. Compared to breach the matrix, the lives of the people of the barren state were far more important to him. Chapter 809. Chess Saint cast an indifferent gaze at Futian, said nothing, and looking at Lu Zong. He was unparalleled in the art of matrix, but at the moment he was trapped under the sword diagram with a horrifying great matrix bearing pressure on top of him that could take his life at any moment. He could not divert his attention to instructing Lu Zong on how to breach the matrix. Moreover, the matrix was constantly evolving, and not being within the matrix, along with having his spiritual will blocked, prevented him from peering into the matrix, leaving him on the sidelines with nothing to do but watch. Chess Saint cast an indifferent gaze at Futian, said nothing, and looking at Lu Zong. He was unparalleled in the art of matrix, but at the moment he was trapped under the sword diagram with a horrifying great matrix bearing pressure on top of him that could take his life at any moment. He could not divert his attention to instructing Lu Zong on how to breach the matrix. Moreover, the matrix was constantly evolving, and not being within the matrix, along with having his spiritual will blocked, prevented him from peering into the matrix, leaving him on the sidelines with nothing to do but watch. Even so, being a strong cultivator of the Saint plane, Chess Saint was able to face this predicament while remaining cool and collected. His godlike body implanted in the midst of the destructive sword matrix, that terrifying sword matrix seemed to be able to destroy all but had not been able to consume him yet. Lu Zong had begun the breach of the matrix, leading the groups from Shihua Sacred Mountain, Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, and the 9 disciples of Chess Saint into the matrix, step by step. Lu Zong was quite accomplished in the ways of the matrix, and with the support of the 9 disciples of Chess Saint, it seemed that even this impossible sword matrix, where every step could spell death, could not stop them from moving forward. Everyone was advancing, standing in different positions, and seemed to be in the formation of the matrix also. Futian observed quietly. He was in no hurry. He would let Lu Zong go and try it first. People from other holy lands stood in the same place without moving. Although each holy land had master matrix sorcerers present, at times such as this, without absolute certainty, who dared to take the risk? They even hoped that Lu Zong would be able to breach the matrix, so that they would have the opportunity to extricate themselves instead of being trapped here, unable to move. There was an elder who led the cultivators of the Xia clan because he wanted to investigate the Nether Sword Mound. He was also a powerful cultivator within the saint and sage ranking. Have you observed something strange about the sword? The elder of the Xia clan asked those around him. Yes. Everyone nodded. It's as if it's alive and can detect our movements. All the sword matrices seem to be set up by this sword. Have you ever heard of the rumors regarding the Nether Swordsman? The elder asked again, and everyone shook their heads as they continued to listen to the old man. There were rumors that there were 2 sword slaves under the nether swordsman. Both were of the same plane. One died and the other sacrificed to the word and became the body of the sword. Sword slaves are all of the same plane. Many trembled at the thought. There are different ranks within the same plane. The nether swordsman was known as possessing an unparalleled method of Saint Plane. So how is it strange? The old man spoke lightly. The sages were above many others and treated them as subordinates, which was the same in all holy lands of the 9 states. You mean? Somebody stared at the giant sword, their heart pounding fiercely. Sacrifice the body to the sword and turn it into the sword itself. Then to feel the aura emanated from the sword, ancient and lethal, as if stained with endless blood. The master of all swords that could control all the sword will of heaven and earth and turned it into sword diagrams and sword matrices. If it was really as people had surmised, that such a sword was located in this place, then what would that mean? No one knew, and perhaps no one would be able to solve the mystery. They've breached one sword realm, someone said, looking at Lu Zong. Lu Zong could be seen leading the cultivators of all 3 parties, solidifying a matrix of their own, breaking into the depths of the sword matrix. Where they passed, a field of sword matrix had been annihilated and turned safe. Is it true that he can breach this staunch sword matrix? Many trembled inside. The space was enclosed with endless murderous sword will. Lu Zong and his group continued pushing forward, but there was still a long way to go. Right then, a cultivator of the great Zhou sacred dynasty took a step, and just when his foot touched the ground, a devastating exhalation descended from the sky above. His heart violently beat, and as he looked up, a streak of horrifying sword will fell on him like lightning. A soft hiss and he was pulverized without a trace. One wrong step means death. Lu Zong and the others stared, and the air suddenly became incomparably heavy. Apparently, in this terrifying matrix, even someone as accomplished as Lu Zong could still make a mistake. Lu Zong stood there, looking slightly awkward. He looked in the direction of the people from the great Zhou sacred dynasty. This is the real core of the sword matrix here at Nether Sword Mound. If it can be breached, there's a chance to take the divine sword, or even taking control of the Nether Sword Mound, as well as help to rescue our Eastern State forebear, Chess Saint. But every step here is full of danger, and even I do not have absolute certainty. Although Saint and the Sacred King made a pact, if the Sacred King of the Great Zhou dynasty wishes to withdraw now, I will not object. The countenance on those from the Great Zhou sacred dynasty was gloomy. After all, the one who died was one of their own, a member of the Golden Phoenix Army, whose bloodline was that of the nobles of the sacred dynasty. Of course, if this matrix is not breached, I'm afraid we will all perish here, Lu Zong continued. Go ahead, then, Zhou Du of the Great Zhou sacred dynasty said. Zhou Du was the older half-brother of Zhou Ya and Zhou Yu, son of the Great Zhou sacred king, who was of the top-ranking Magi plane, and only one step from Sage plane. Because his spiritual talent was extremely elevated and his strength unyielding, he was the leader of the delegates from the Great Zhou sacred dynasty, and he had volunteered. The Great Zhou sacred king was a king of the sacred dynasty and had many sons. Even so, he was reluctant to put his children at risk, so the task of entering the Forbidden Land was on a voluntary basis. However, Zhou Du and the others ventured into the Nether Sword Mound because the order was issued by the Sacred King himself, and was therefore of great importance. He clearly took the matter of the Nether Sword Mound extremely seriously, and so, they were willing to give it a try here. Very well. Lu Zong nodded. We will take turns, one step each so the chances are equal. If the step is wrong, then it was only fate. Everyone nodded, but Zhou Du had some reservations. The person who led the mission was Lu Zong. Naturally, the disciples of Chess Saint could not afford to die. Between Xihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, Lu Zong might be more inclined to protect Xihua Sacred Mountain. With Lu Zong's accomplishment in matrices, he would be able to detect which step was more dangerous than others. But he obviously could not voice his suspicions out loud. Lu Zong continued with the breach of the matrix, and the group continued pushing forward. They had now gone deep into the belly of the matrix, step by step, moving toward the giant sword. Their objective was clear. In the process of the breach, there were fatalities in succession. Among them, the death rate of those from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty was significantly higher than that of Xihua Sacred Mountain. The 9 disciples of Chess Saint were experts of matrices themselves, so they were able to make some calculations and stayed safe. Incidentally, the fallen were weaker cultivators and not the most pivotal of the party. Under such circumstances, it was clear to everyone what was happening, but no one could pin the blame on anyone. Between life and death, who would not make the most beneficial action and the smallest sacrifice? "I quit," a voice called out. It was a young, strong cultivator from the Golden Phoenix Army. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt stares on him, giving him a great sense of pressure. "Zhou Yan, how dare you?" Zhou Zi scolded. "I give up continuing the breach. If I don't know how many of us from Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty will be able to walk out of here, so I opt to retreat." Zhou Yan looked at Zhou Zi firmly. Not long ago before this, his brother had perished in the sword matrix. Besides, he could feel that it would soon be his turn to be used to explore and test the most dangerous places. Even if the matrix would finally be breached, he would still be dead. Obviously, he was not willing to be expandable. "I agree with Zhou Yan," someone else piped up, also a member of the Golden Phoenix Army. He looked sharply at Lu Zong with a clear sense of disapproval. Thereafter, the voices of dissent continued. Many from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty declined to continue. What did they have anything to do with the mission of rescuing Chess Saint? Even though the Sacred King had assigned tasks to them, compared to their lives, what could be more important? "It's falling apart," everyone thought to themselves. Lu Zong had already advanced more than halfway, which was extraordinary, but even so, people's hearts were no longer in it. Not only had those from the Great Sacred Zhou Dynasty began to give up, but even the people of Xihua Sacred Mountain began to tire. They should have never come here. This mission was too dangerous. They had thought that with all the holy lands banding together, they could vanquish even the Forbidden Land. But now, it seemed that they made a grievous mistake. Lu Zong looked perturbed and said, "We have already lasted this long, why give up now? But I won't force anyone who's not willing to continue." After that, he continued with the breach. Some followed and some did not. Yi Futian quietly took everything in. His eyes had a strange luster to them. He was working the freedom meditation. At the same time, in his mind, there was a humongous chessboard playing the moves deduced by Lu Zong, trying to find the solution to breach the matrix, but it was so far unsuccessful. Time passed by bit. This murderous space seemed especially silent. Only the whistling of the sword qi could be heard in the sky. After a while, Zhou Du stopped, a look of humiliation on his face. He said, "We can give up now." Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had suffered great and painful losses. He distinctly felt that the more they approached the end, the stronger the pressure from Lu Zong would become. Even if the matrix was really breached, it might very well be on the lives of all the people from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. Lu Zong still did not give up and continued with Yang Xiao and the others. They stepped closer and closer to the giant sword, but the terrifying sword's matrix was surrounding them, turning into an immensely powerful will to slay. "I can't get through." Lu Zong closed his eyes and was disappointed to the core. Yang Xiao and the rest also felt that they had been mistaken. This method could not breach the matrix. Chess Saint also revealed a look of disappointment. Just as anticipated, there was no miracle. When he was here, he too took a wrong step, so that he lost everything. Even though Lu Zong was outstanding, the matrix was still beyond him. Then on to the second method as a last resort. "Lu Zong, Yang Xiao, come back and see if you can open a gap in the sword matrix that trapped me." "I will try to use matrix against matrix," Chess Saint said. A flash crossed Lu Zong's eyes, but he nodded nonetheless. "Yes, master." Yang Xiao and others complied. Li Kaishan bowed his head slightly, a keen look in his eyes. Lu Zong and the rest had begun to retreat. At the moment, a safe area emerged in the matrix. In addition to Lu Zong's expertise in matrices, retreat was not a problem. But right then, Yi Futian stepped out toward the matrix. Behind Yi Futian and sage Wanxiang, starlight twinkled, and a star wheel rotated, revealing a resplendent astrological phenomenon of divinatory symbols in the void. Suddenly, all eyes were now on sage Wanxiang, the master astrologer. But astrologers were known for their short lifespan, so it was fitting that an astrologer should be involved at this point of the breach. Soon, there was a region where the sword chi had been smashed, and the swords that were in the earth dissipated, which made many people look especially relieved. Yi Futian and his companions stood in different positions, moving forward in formation. Obviously, Yi Futian was as equally accomplished in the art of matrices as Lu Zong. Quickly, Yi Futian returned to where he was before, and abruptly, the sword matrix evolved once again, as if everything he had done before was in vain. Again, Yi Futian continued his attempt to move forward, cautiously letting sage Wanxiang reveal good or evil before taking each step. It was not that he was not confident in himself, but he would not gamble with the lives of those from the barren state, so he would only step into the matrix if he was absolutely certain. It's still not right. Yi Futian attempted a few more times in a row and turned back each time. The chessboard in his mind calculated wildly, but the outcome of each one was a failure. It's impossible for you to breach this matrix. Come over and help me. At this instant, a voice called out, causing Yi Futian to turn his eyes to the direction of Chess Saint. At the moment, Yang Shao and the others, the cultivators from Shihua Sacred Mountain, and the people of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty stood in different positions under the sword diagram that trapped Chess Saint. Yi Futian's pupils contracted slightly. He was preoccupied with breaching the matrix before and did not pay much attention to the situation there. But now perceiving the scene in front of him, he had a slight premonition of something going terribly wrong. Looking at the sword diagram above Chess Saint, and in his mind, the chessboard continued its calculations, and the situation was presented in the spirit chessboard. His expression changed quickly. Allow the people of the barren state to help rescue me, and you can be a successor of mine. I will pass the way of the matrix on to you and keep an eye on the welfare of the barren state. Chess Saint continued, with the capabilities of Lu Zong and Yang Shao, coupled with your expertise in matrices and the strong practitioners of the barren state, I have a 90% certainty to be freed. Naturally, I believe you. With all due respect, at this moment, I am deep in the matrix, so I will try to breach this one first, and perhaps then there will an opportunity to extricate you. Yi Futian refused diplomatically. Insolence. Chess Saint's voice was icy, and he gazed at Yi Futian. I already said that it's impossible for you to breach that sword matrix. Except for me, no one can do it. Now help me quickly. Like a god, his voice conveyed the absolute authority of a saint, and no one dared to disobey his tyrannical command. Those from the barren state frowned. Chess Saint was the one trapped, and yet he dared to be this demanding? As if the people of the barren state were in debt to him? Unfortunately, I am unable to comply, Yi Futian replied. He looked at Jiao Gongzi, wondering if he should warn him. But the Chess Saint was his master. If he chose not to heed it, what then? How dare you? The Chess Saint spoke coldly. Do you know the consequences for disobeying my orders? As soon as he finished speaking, the air was filled with a subtle fear that made people's hearts palpitate. Yi Futian looked extremely conflicted. His eyes swept toward those from Shihua Sacred Mountain, the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, Yang Shao, and the others. He said, if you want to live, retreat quickly now. Everyone was stunned and looked at Yi Futian. What did it mean? Chess Saint's eyes flashed an exceedingly cold intent to kill when he heard what was said. Brother Yi, Jiao Gongzi called out. He did not understand. Jiao Gongzi, you should know that I have read extensively in the field of matrix formations, and I have integrated that knowledge and comprehended its ways. There is a lesser-known matrix called sacrificial matrix. In the calculation I just made, where you are all standing is roughly in the formation of a sacrificial matrix. Yi Futian said, your master, Chess Saint, set you up to come here, to make you a sacrifice, so he can be freed. Chapter 8:10. Yi Futian's words were like a jolt of lightning, causing Yang Shao and the others to feel confused. Yi Futian's words were like a jolt of lightning, causing Yang Xiao and the others to feel confused. Their master wanted to use them as a sacrifice? Presently, the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty and Xihua Sacred Mountain had experts standing in the matrix where the chess saint was trapped in. Their expressions all paled, and they looked towards the chess saint. Even though they were prejudiced against Yi Futian, they still took his words in and were cautious. Master, Yang Zhao's wife, the chess saint's third disciple, called out. She looked towards the chess saint with a pale expression. In reality, she had been practicing the art of the matrix with her master since young. Although her master had never taught them these kinds of sacrificial matrices, she had felt that the location that their group was standing was ominous. The people from the various holy lands looked towards the chess saint. At that moment, it was like time had stopped. Yi Futian's expression was extremely piercing. It turned out that from the start, the chess saint had never trusted that anyone could help him break free from this extraordinary sword matrix, even if they could solve the celestial dragon chess game. How could someone do what he could not? So, the chess saint had created a setup in the chess saint villa to select a suitable candidate. Under those circumstances, he did not even need to consider who he should pick between him and Lu Zong. Lu Zong was someone with ambition, and he could bring Xihua Sacred Mountain's experts into the sacrificial matrix. From Lu Zong's current position, Yi Futian knew that the chess saint and Lu Zong must have had come to an agreement. Otherwise, he would not sacrifice the Xihua Sacred Mountain and Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty's experts. Of course, just like when they were solving the matrix previously, the most crucial few like Zhou Du and Zhou Yu were all in safe locations. Evidently, Lu Zong did not dare to make two reckless moves. Yi Futian even wondered if Saint Xihua knew about this setup. If he did not, how was Lu Zong to account for the death of the Xihua Sacred Mountain's experts after the chess saint was released? Yi Futian knew that once he said those words, he had offended the chess saint completely. However, how could he agree to letting the chess saint use the barren state as a sacrifice? Since that was the case, he could only fall out with the chess saint and make Yang Xiao and the rest escape, not allowing the chess saint's plan to come to fruition. Nonsense. Look clearly, what is this matrix? A terrifying light shot out of the chess saint's eyes, and instantly, the surrounding people felt a formless force, as though a strong magnetic force was pulling them in. A frightening force flowed from the chess saint onto their bodies. Why are you not retreating? Do you want to die? Yi Futian shouted. Retreat. The people from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty were the most decisive and retreated immediately. Regardless of whether it was a sacrificial matrix, they had no obligation to help the chess saint escape. The people from Xihua Sacred Mountain also started to retreat. However, just as they were about to leave, the sword matrix of the void surrounded them. All of them were trapped in the matrix. The giant chessboard descended from the skies. At that moment, they were like pieces on the board. The sword diagram's force that had targeted the chess saint all rushed towards them. Master, why? Yang Zhao's expression was pale as he stared at his master. How could he not understand what he had been caught up in? The 9 of them had always been proud of their master. Even after their master had been trapped, they continued to follow his orders and follow Lu Zong into the Forbidden Land to save him despite the danger. The Holy Lands had come for the secret of the Nether Sword Mound while they had come to save the chess saint. However, their master had set up a ploy to use them as a sacrifice. The heavens are the chessboard and the masses are its pieces. I am willing to become a chess player. This is the way of chess. The chess saint's voice was solemn and there was no trace of hesitation in his eyes. He had cultivated for many years to become a saint that was revered by the masses. He entered the forbidden land of the Nether Sword Mound for the 9 states #1 matrix, but he was not willing to be trapped in the Nether Sword Mound. I do not understand, Yang Xiao replied. That is why you cannot become a saint, the chess saint said coolly. Yang Xiao, master has always had high expectations for you, but your disposition is weak. If you enter the saint plane, you could have lent me a hand without me having to do this. Cultivation is to plunder, plundering the Tao of the heavens. Many experts from holy lands reeled at the chess saint's words. Was cultivation really to plunder? If the chess saint felt that cultivation was plundering the Tao of the heavens, what else would he not plunder? The heavens were the chessboard, but he wanted to be the player. What is the point of cultivating in such a heartless Tao? Yi Futian had an ashen expression as he asked. He was slower in the end. He did not expect the chess saint to be so decisive and activate the matrix immediately, causing those who tried to retreat to be trapped. Evidently, the chess saint had made adequate preparations. The path of Tao is originally heartless. Do you even know cultivation? The chess saint glanced at Yi Futian with a frigid expression. This bastard could actually see through the sacrificial matrix. It was no wonder that he did not end up as his chess piece. Without the people of the barren state, the strength of the sacrificial matrix would weaken significantly and he was much less confident. Moreover, he had no choice but to activate it prematurely because of Yi Futian. At that moment, through his icy stare, Yi Futian was like a dead man to him. Seeing the chess saint's stare full of killing intent, Yi Futian casually turned around and did not look at the chess saint. He knew what he had to do. If the chess saint really broke loose, he would die a terrible death. He needed to find a way to break through the matrix in order to have a chance at survival. Yang Xiao, for all of you to die for me, you have nothing to regret. The chess saint's voice sounded throughout the area, causing many people from the various holy lands to feel chills down their spine. If it had not been for the chess saint's order to not attack the barren state's people, or perhaps he had done it to borrow their strength for the sacrificial matrix, his threats and temptation towards Yi Futian was to make the people from the barren state enter the sacrificial matrix. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the chess saint moved. He wanted to rush out of the matrix diagram, but the sword diagram's force crushed down with terrifying swordsmanship towards a direction. Over there, one of the great Zhou sacred dynasty's experts shouted in agony as he was crushed to smithereens and a chess piece replaced him to withstand the attack for the chess saint. Chess saint, you dare kill the people from the great Zhou sacred dynasty? Even if you escape today, the sacred king will not let you off, another person from the great Zhou sacred dynasty said coldly. As his voice landed, a terrifying force rushed towards him, killing him off. At the same time, more pressure was lifted off the chess saint. To the chess saint, his number one priority now was to get out. Everything else was secondary. Moreover, he had tried his best to keep the sacrifices to a minimum. However, if it came down to it, he could kill everyone. If he did not, he would end up dead in the matrix. He really has the chance to destroy the matrix? The people from the various holy lands stared at the chess saint. His mastery in matrices was originally already unrivaled in the 9 states. Even though he was trapped in the sword matrix, he did not die and was able to confront the sword matrix. Now that many experts had entered the sacrificial matrix, he could divert the sword matrix's force towards them and break the balance, allowing him a chance to escape. What would happen if the chess saint managed to escape? Would he be able to destroy the sword matrix? Their gazes turned towards Yi Futian. They saw Yi Futian also attempting to destroy the matrix, but he did not borrow Sage Wanxiang's strength any longer. There was no more time. He could not afford to use divination for every step he took. His speed was fast, but he had repeatedly returned to the starting point with a grim expression. He could not destroy it. There were no weak points in the matrix. There was no flaw in the matrix. It was even more terrifying than the celestial dragon chess game. Although he had the sword diagram, he had not completely comprehended the 10th sword diagram. Otherwise, he would have entered the Forbidden Land a long time ago and not waited so long. However, the arrival of the people from the various holy lands forced his hand and he could only enter. In his head, he advanced the movements of the chessboard at a terrifying pace, but it was pointless. At that moment, he turned around. A heart-wrenching sound was heard as a terrifying sword will impaled Yang Zhao's wife's body. The number 1 beauty of Yujing City gradually became ethereal. She looked at the figure in the air that was emitting boundless light with a vengeance. That was the person that she respected the most, but he had ended her life in such a way. Tears trickled down her face as she took one final look at Yang Xiao before disappearing. "Sister," the other shouted, but in the next moment, sword wills descended one after the other, and the chess saint's disciples all died and crumbled to dust. Soon, there were only 3 people left among the 9 disciples. They were Yang Xiao, Li Kaishan, and Jiu Gongzi. Yang Xiao was an expert on the sage and saint ranking, so his resilience was the strongest. Jiao Gongzi was the weakest, so he could not provide much strength, even if he was sacrificed. As such, the chess saint could not be bothered to sacrifice him, so he was spared. Conversely, Li Kaishan actually retreated from the matrix. You knew! Yang Xiao shouted at Li Kaishan with a cold tone. Big brother, for master, die with no regrets. Li Kaishan looked at Yang Xiao and said, Why don't you die instead? Jiao Gongzi shouted out. With his personality, seeing his brothers and sisters die in front of him was enough to send him into a frenzy. When he looked at his imposing master, it was like looking at a demon. How awful! The people from the various holy lands saw the scene and thought, incredulous. Those who entered the matrix had died with the exception of Lu Zong and a few others. The vast majority had not died in attempting to destroy the matrix, but to the sacrificial matrix. The chess saint was really ruthless. He could kill his own disciples without a shred of hesitation. He was decisive, strong-willed, and could not be moved. Crackle. Cracks appeared in the terrifying sword diagram as the chess saint flew higher and higher. All of a sudden, countless chess pieces flew forward and a fearsome shadow passed through the matrix, escaping from it and flying forward. Materialization of spiritual will. Everyone was stunned. The chess saint had not escaped, as his physical body was still trapped in the matrix, but another chess saint had rushed out and was heading towards the giant sword. The giant sword howled and a cold gaze looked towards the chess saint. In the skies, under the blood-colored sword eyes, flowed a terrifying sword will. The sword diagram in the skies rolled around in a frenzy, then descended from the sky onto the chess saint like blades from another dimension. The path as a chessboard. A cold voice sounded, and countless chess pieces appeared in the area and flew towards the heavens, turning it into a chessboard. With a thunderous sound, a blade that was slashing down was blocked by a chess piece in the sky. Crash, crash, crash. The violent clashes continued, causing the air to quiver and the earth to shake. In the skies, countless black chess pieces turned into a chessboard. The Great Path chessboard managed to block all the falling swords. Even so, cracks appeared on the Great Path chessboard. The pieces looked as though they were about to fall apart, but they had created enough time for the chess saint. His body was already landing where the giant sword was and his hands stretching out to grab it. Lu Zong looked towards his direction with a gleam in his eyes. That sword was the key to the nether sword mound and was likely to be able to control all the sword wills. Just as the chess saint's palm landed, an extremely sharp force that could slice through everything emerged from the sword. In the next moment, a towering killing light burst forth from the giant sword. The sword then disappeared and was replaced by a human figure. The human figure felt as though it had been forged by countless swords. His gaze was like swords, his arms were like swords, his body was like a sword, and even his silver hairs were swords. It's really him? The experts from the Xia clan gasped. Could it be that his conjecture was correct? The giant sword was a sword slave that followed the sword saint of the void back then and had sacrificed himself to his sword to protect the sword saint of the void. Could it be that the sword saint of the void was really buried here? At that moment, the sword matrix in the air suddenly rampaged, and countless sword chi rushed downwards with even more force. However, the chess saint turned around and looked coldly in Yi Futian's direction. Immediately, one of the chess pieces in the air was destroyed and a sword chi descended from the sky. Watch out! Yi Futian shouted. However, in front of him, a person from Tombkeeper village was killed on the spot, causing Yi Futian's expression to become pale. The rustling sword currents were unbelievably wild as the chess saint and the sword figure were at a stalemate. Around the two of them, an alarming whirlpool appeared and the chess pieces cut off the earth while the sword veil blocked off the air. The destructive air current rampaged in the area, but even so, the chess saint still wanted to kill Yi Futian and his friends. Uncle Fong. Yaya's expression was pale as she shouted, "If you enter the sacrificial matrix, perhaps you might not die," the chess saint said in a cold voice. Yaya's gaze turned icy as her eyes turned crimson, like blood, and it was as though there was a sword in her eyes. Around her body, A terrifying sword will flowed and her body gradually rose into the air with an ancient aura. At that moment, the sword will in the air seemed to resonate with the one around her body. The sense of familiarity was becoming even stronger. Yaya raised her head and looked at the blood-colored sword in the air. The same scene also appeared in her eyes, and at that moment her blood-colored eyes let out a gleaming light that was extremely brilliant. Behind her eyes, countless sword wills appeared in the air and turned into a horrifying storm that moved towards Yaya. Not just that, but the sword matrix in the air seemed to have formed a resonance with her. The matrix let out a brilliant light as though it had been activated. Yaya. Futian raised his head and looked towards Yaya. He was not too shocked as he had his conjectures previously. The chess saint looked towards Yaya, and an extremely sharp glint appeared in his eyes. The matrix had been activated. So that was why. No wonder he could not destroy the matrix, as the matrix in this area was a dead matrix. Lu Zong, she's a spiritual body. Take her down and stand in her position to destroy the matrix. The chess saint shouted. Yaya was likely to be the sword spiritual body or the matrix spiritual body, so she was the crux of the matrix. The nether sword mound actually had two foundations, the main sword matrix and this last, who was the core of the matrix. Chapter 8:11. Lu Zong looked towards Yaya, but he saw Futian look at him, then said, Shihua Sacred Mountain's Lu Zong should have no part in the chess saint's escape? He intentionally said this because he wanted to see if Lu Zong actually dared to do it. Lu Zong looked towards Yaya, but he saw Futian look at him, then said, Shihua Sacred Mountain's Lu Zong should have no part in the chess saint's escape? He intentionally said this because he wanted to see if Lu Zong actually dared to do it. If he stepped in, it would mean that he had actually participated in the chess saint's escape plan. If that was so, would Shihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty let him off? Lu Zong's gaze landed on Futian as he said, the chess saint is a saint. How many saints are there in the 9 states? Every saint plane cultivator is a treasure to the 9 states. Since the situation is like it is now, the most important thing to do is to help Senior Chess Saint break free. Palace Lord Yi, if you help out in cracking the matrix now, perhaps Senior will not begrudge you. In that case, the people from Shihua Sacred Mountain, Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, and the Chess Saint Villa's disciples all deserve to die? Futian's expression was frigid as he replied. In the 9 states, how many people are on the saint ranking? Lu Zong stepped forward as he retorted. A few experts from the Shihua Sacred Mountain followed him. These were the important people in Shihua Sacred Mountain and were not sacrificed. Of course, Li Kaishan was there as well. Go crack the matrix. The sword saint looked at Futian and said as he took out his broadsword. Go. Zhuge Qingfeng and Sage Wanxiang chipped in as well. The situation at hand was extremely dire. At least the chess saint was being restricted now. Once the chess saint completely broke free, they would all die. The chess saint had already made his choice and would not stop. Futian nodded and looked at Yaya, then turned and walked towards the matrix, saying, Follow me. Gu Donglu, Hua Jieyu, and the others followed Futian even though they were of no help. Yuan Hong also followed Futian. At that moment, he had transformed into a giant golden ape and stood tall like a demon god, standing guard at the side. He would protect Futian. To him, Futian's life was more important than anything else. In this chaotic matrix, danger was in every corner. You guys deal with them. Li Kaishan will accompany me in cracking the matrix, Lu Zong said as he left the sword saint to Shihua Sacred Mountain's experts. The opportunity to crack the matrix had already appeared, so he needed to crack it before Futian. Otherwise, once Futian cracked the matrix, they did not know what changes would appear. Lu Zong exerted his spiritual energy to the limit. A Buddhist light glowed as he formed the hand of wisdom and he started to decipher in his head. Signs of cracking finally appeared in the terrifying sword matrix. Yaya's appearance had activated the matrix. It was no longer a dead matrix and could be cracked. In his head, the sword diagram in the sky let out a boundless glow and the sword wills in the area filled the vast area. The center was filled with killing intent, and the 5 elements and 8 trigrams appeared in the matrix. Cracking the matrix would require technique, not cultivation level. Li Kaishan, follow my instructions, Lu Zong said as he pointed to a location. Go there. A glint appeared in Li Kaishan's eyes. His mastery in matrices was also extraordinary, even among the 9 disciples of the chess saint. His mastery in matrices could be ranked first alongside Yang Xiao. He could naturally see that the step that Lu Zong had chosen was extremely exquisite. Attempting to destroy the life of the matrix. He had chosen the location where the matrix was born, and Lu Zong had asked him to destroy one of the cores of the matrix. However, he was still hesitant. Seeing that, Lu Zong frowned and transmitted his voice, saying, Li Kaishan, if we are successful today, there will be a place for you in the battle for the divine path. Li Kaishan's expression lit up. Why did he look for Lu Zong initially? The masses thought that he was an honest person, but in reality he had already understood the truth of the world. When his master had taught them, he had once said that the masses were mere chess pieces. He was unwilling to accept his fate as a chess piece and wanted to become a chess player. His big brother and third sister were in love, but he was single and understood his master the most. Although he had taken in 9 disciples, it was for the purpose of advancing his own path. By teaching disciples, he could comprehend the deeper meaning behind the path. Although the chess saint usually treated them extremely well, he was actually a heartless person. In all his years of cultivation, he had no path companion and no children, only focusing on his cultivation. He, Li Kaishan, was the person who was most like his master, the chess saint. He would naturally leave a way out for himself and also for the battle for the divine path in the future. Now, Lu Zong had a way out, but he did not. Stepping forward, Li Kaishan had no choice but to become Lu Zong's chess piece. He released an extremely strong aura as his footsteps landed heavily on the ground, trampling the swords beneath his feet. There were no other swords that flew towards him from the air, meaning that he had chosen the correct path. This step was exceptionally important. I have a chance. Lu Zong's expression was sharp as he continued to observe the matrix. He then pointed out another step for Li Kaishan to continue walking. Li Kaishan continued forward, moving through the matrix, continuously destroying it. The direction that Li Kaishan was walking in was the direction where the giant sword was. Lu Zong did not move and stood still, occasionally looking at Yaya, as though waiting for a chance. If he wanted to destroy the matrix, Yaya was an important element. Many people watched the scene with gleaming expressions. Perhaps there really was a way to destroy the matrix. On the other end, a battle had already erupted between the Sword Saint and Lu Zong's men. They did not dare to move recklessly as the terrifying demonic blade slashed through the air towards them. The other party struck out with his palm with the force of a mountain to counter. Ying, Ho, and the other people from Tombkeeper village all stood around Yaya, looking cautiously at the various factions. The people from the various holy lands had it the worst, completely becoming onlookers that were at risk within the trap that the chess saint had set. They had no way of resisting against the matrix. Perhaps a saint could do so, but saint plane cultivators would not put themselves in danger easily. After all, even the chess saint had been trapped here. At this moment, Futian also started to crack the matrix. He closed his eyes and released his spiritual energy. The sight from the outside world was imprinted into his head as he started deciphering the matrix. Hua Jiu released her life spirit and used her telekinesis to fuse everyone's spiritual energy together. However, Futian did not give the command after a long time and continued deciphering. Hua Jiu, Yu Sheng and Gu Donglu all looked towards Futian, waiting patiently. Pooh! Taking a deep breath, Futian opened his eyes again and looked at the people beside him, saying, "Let me test the matrix personally. Among us, only you can decipher the matrix. If you test the matrix and something goes wrong, all of us will die here." Gu Donglu looked at Futian with a sharp expression and said, "Be decisive when you need to." As cultivators, their mindsets were firm. The chess saint did not even have a shred of hesitation when sacrificing his disciples. As for Futian, he hesitated even when his friends were willing to test the matrix for him. This was Yi Futian's weakness. His emotions could be a weakness as well. Although the chess saint was ruthless, he was decisive and had no weaknesses. That was why he could immediately make a decision that was most beneficial for him at any time. There is no time to hesitate. Yi Wuchen also attempted to persuade Yi Futian. Yi Futian looked at the friends in front of him. He did not know whether it was the correct decision to enter the trap. Sage Wanxiang had once divined that this trip would be ominous. However, if they grab the opportunity, it could be a blessing. The Baron State's palace has made it through every battle so far. So what if we're in this trap today? It is merely a repetition of history, Su Ke said lazily, as though he did not care. Since they had chosen to leave the Baron State, since they had chosen to enter the Nether Sword Mound, there was nothing to hesitate about. Taking a look at the chess saint, Yaya, and his big brother's battle, Yi Futian's expression became more determined all of a sudden. He closed his eyes and fused his consciousness with the others. In an instant, a terrifying sword diagram appeared in everyone's heads. The sword diagram appeared huge, with yin and yang supporting each other, the 5 elements all present, the 8 trigrams imprinted. The swords hovered in the air with an unyielding aura. All of them appeared to have seen through the giant formation. Everything that was in Yi Futian's head was presented before them. They even saw Lu Zong ordering Li Kaishan to weave through the sword matrix. Every step he took was a breach in the matrix, attempting to walk out from the matrix to retrieve the giant sword. This was Lu Zong's method of destroying the matrix. Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. A voice sounded from Yi Futian's head and said to them, "Enter from the Kuan position." As his voice landed, the ancient directions, Qian, Kuan, Li, Qin, all appeared on the giant sword diagram. There were also the yin and yang formation as well as the 5 elements. They all fit into the formation and the sword matrix surrounded the sword diagram with endless life, creating countless sword wills. "I'll go," Gu Donglu said. As he said that, he stepped forward, and Yi Futian clenched his fists tightly. Every movement by his third brother was played in slow motion in his head. There was even a bead of sweat on his forehead. The ending that he had deciphered was completely different from before and the complete opposite of what Lu Zong was doing. He was not attempting to destroy the matrix. If his conjecture was wrong, it would be fatal. His third brother could end up dying, so naturally he was scared. Not just him, Zhuge Mingyue and the others also watched intently. Time appeared to have slowed down. This first step was extremely crucial. If this step was wrong, Yi Futian would know that he was wrong, but his third brother might have to pay with his life. He had wanted to take the step himself, but Gu Donglu had said that he was the only one with the mastery to decipher the matrix. If anything happened to him, all of them would end up dying here. Then, Gu Donglu was the first to step out and test the matrix. This was his resolve. Time passed slowly as Yi Futian's heart pounded. At that moment, 9 words surrounded Gu Donglu, emitting a brilliant light. He had already released his life spirit, as though he was preparing to ward off a killing strike at any time. Finally, his foot landed in the direction, and immediately sword wills passed by his body with no killing intent. The formation in the sky appeared to have lit up even more. Success! Yi Futian heaved a sigh of relief. He did not dare to imagine what would have happened if his third brother had taken the wrong step. How would he be able to face himself then? It was no wonder he was that nervous. He opened his eyes and looked at Yaya, his gaze becoming resolute. When Yaya communicated with the blood-colored sword eye, adding on what the village chief had said to him, he had an extremely crazy thought. Since there was a chance of survival, that chance of survival was the opportunity. Why did they have to destroy the matrix? The sword matrix was only able to be activated because of Yaya. It had been activated from a dead matrix. Since that was so, why did they need to destroy it? Perhaps the chess saint was wrong from the start. As such, he had misled the chess saint Villa, Lu Zong and everyone else. Lu Zong had also seen Gu Donglio's movements. An astonished expression appeared in his eyes. What was Yi Futian trying to do? He was not destroying the matrix, he was guiding the matrix. Was he out of his mind? Li Kaishan was destroying the matrix's momentum while he was accumulating it. Yi Futian's method of destroying the matrix was the complete opposite of his. Did Yi Futian really want to destroy the matrix? Koan position. Since his third brother was fine, Yi Futian's expression became even more determined and he closed his eyes again. He did not let anyone else take the next step. The people around him were all close to him. He would not make a decision or sacrifice anyone. If he decided to sacrifice someone, his mind would waver and he would feel guilty. Zhuge Mingyue took the second step, following in Gu Dongliu's footsteps and landing in the Kuan position. Li position, Yi Futian continued. Following that, Hua Jiyu and Yu Sheng stepped forward one after the other to gain momentum for the matrix, causing it to become even brighter. The entire sword matrix appeared to have been activated, becoming stronger. In the skies, where the blood-colored sword eye was, countless sword wills flowed and landed on Yaya's body, circulating within her body. Yaya closed her eyes and her ordinary aura had disappeared and the current her had a razor-sharp aura. He was the chess saint's second disciple and an archmage, so he was extremely strong. The axe's cleave seemed as though it would kill Yaya. The two experts from Tombkeeper village immediately turned around and struck out with their fists. Ferocious beasts appeared and let out earth-shattering howls, but they were still cleaved apart by Li Kaishan's axe. The two of them stepped forward at the same time and a wild aura erupted from them, stopping Li Kaishan in his tracks. With Yaya at the center, a huge battle broke out. Ying tore through the air and reached Lu Zong, his brilliant rock blade slashing down. The two of them were at similar cultivation levels and a terrifying fight broke out. Lu Zong was extremely strong. He was the most outstanding cultivator of the young generation in Shihua Sacred Mountain and was reputed as the next successor. He was taught by 3 saints and they pinned their hopes on him. As such, everyone could see how high their expectations for Lu Zong were. Lu Zong also had huge ambitions and had even wanted Yi Futian to follow his orders and serve him, to make the Baron State's palace lord work under him. However, at that moment, Ying, at the same cultivation level as him, had stopped him and erupted with an astonishing battle ability. This caused Lu Zong to be shocked. Tombkeeper village actually had such a prodigy that could battle with him in the same cultivation level? Yi Futian was still deciphering the matrix and exerted his mastery of matrices to the limit. In the sky, the blood-colored sword became even more demonic and the sword eye gradually opened and was becoming stronger as those sword wills were coming to it from the void. The chess saint naturally felt the aura and he raised his head and looked at it. His expression changed and he said, Yi Futian, your mastery in the matrices is extraordinary. No matter what happened in the past, I will not dwell over it. If you lend me a helping hand today, I can help you to enter the divine path in the future. Yi Futian heard the chess saint's words and opened his eyes, looking at the chess saint. He said coldly, Scram? Now that the chess saint had already tried to kill him, he still had the gall to open his mouth? The great path has no place for sentiments. In order to break free, the chess saint had sacrificed his own disciples. He could sacrifice everyone's lives in order to break free. If he agreed, what could the chess saint not do to break free and obtain the sword matrix of the void? His promise? What a joke! He was devoid of even kinship and humanity. Under these circumstances, after seeing him decipher the matrix, the chess saint actually had the face to open his mouth and ask him for assistance. As for helping him to enter the divine path, he could enter the divine path himself. He had his own path. Since their paths were different, there was no room for cooperation. That was why he had only one word for the chess saint, Scram. Chapter 8:12. A gleam appeared in the chess saint's eyes alongside killing intent. A gleam appeared in the chess saint's eyes alongside killing intent. He was a saint. A younger generation cultivator actually dared to ask him to scram? You're asking for trouble? The chess saint's voice was emotionless. Even though he was trapped, he would not take Yi Futian's insult lying down. In the sky, the great path chessboard shook and a terrifying rule power descended. Next, the chess pieces descended from the sky and assaulted Yi Futian, even breaking through the restraint of the sword wills. Yuan Hong, who was standing beside Yi Futian, let out a deafening roar and emitted a golden light. He held the polearm of divine destruction in his hand and swung it towards the air. The polearm clashed with the chess pieces and a roaring sound could be heard. Each chess piece had rule power within it and was extremely powerful. Yuan Hong's body continued to grow as he roared. The 9 heavenly attacks struck out towards the continually falling black chess pieces. The terrifying residual force swept across the air but was drowned out by the sword matrix. Soon, Yuan Hong vomited blood as he was injured by the chess pieces. At the same time, the chess saint did not have it good either. When he was distracted when dealing with Yi Futian, the force that he had used to combat the giant sword figure was weakened, causing sword chi to penetrate the body that he had created using his will and making it illusory. However, the chess saint treated it as though nothing had happened and had not felt anything. It was as though he really wanted to kill Yi Futian. Before this, he would not do that. However, his killing intent towards Yi Futian had now escalated, not just because Yi Futian had humiliated him, but also because Yi Futian's mastery over matrices had threatened his existence. He had dared to make him scram. If Yi Futian really took control of the matrix, what would happen? The setup that he had planned would be for naught. That was why the chess saint wanted to kill Yi Futian by any means possible and let Lu Zong take over the matrix. Suddenly, a thought appeared in his head. If he had not picked Lu Zong because of his identity back then and had selected Yi Futian, what kind of situation would he be in now? However, the chess saint soon dismissed the thought. As a saint, he had a firm mindset and a resolute belief. He believed that he had not made the wrong decision back then. Lu Zong was definitely the most suitable candidate. Even if Yi Futian had proven today that he was stronger than Lu Zong in terms of matrices, the past was the past. Leaving the past aside, what he needed to do now was to find a way to destroy the matrix and kill Yi Futian. Grandfather Ape. Yi Futian saw Yuan Hong injured and had a grim expression. He did not think that the chess saint still had the excess energy to deal with him. It seemed to him, deciphering the matrix meant that he would be mortal with the chess saint. Today, the chess saint would only be able to break free if he was dead. Otherwise, he would have a tragic end. Sword wills continued to circulate wildly in the sword matrix as chess pieces infused with a horrifying might descended from the sky. However, a sword veil appeared around Yi Futian's body. With a loud sound, cracks appeared in the sword veil. Yi Futian's expression was grim as he said, "Third brother, the next step." It was at these kinds of moments that he could not afford to be frazzled. Time was of the essence. Chess pieces circled above the sword matrix, breaking through the sword will's shroud. The chess saint ignored the attacks towards him and made the chess pieces descend, crushing down on everything. "You dare to humiliate a saint. Die," the chess saint declared coldly, as though his words were deciding Yi Futian's sentence. The chess saint hollered. When Li Kaishan heard his master's order, he was hesitant. At that moment, the scene in front of him was exceedingly scary. Cracks had appeared in the earth, the blood-colored sword eye had opened and an ancient sword had been summoned while the sword matrix was becoming stronger. In the sky, countless swords appeared. They were sufficient to destroy the entire nether sword mound. The sword matrix of the void. Li Kaishan was dumbfounded. How could this happen? Why was the person who rejuvenated the sword matrix of the void and took control of it Yi Futian? Would everything that he had planned be for naught? Back then, he had chosen Lu Zong and allowed him to decipher the matrix because he was going with the flow. Yi Futian deciphering the matrix was merely an accident. But why had today's situation become like this? Why was the Barren States Yi Futian able to deal with his master's setup as well as Shihua Sacred Mountains Lu Zong? However, Li Kaishan already had no other choice. He raised the battle axe in his hand and released his life spirit. Countless rule power erupted and assimilated into his battle axe. He cleaved down at Yaya through the air, penetrating the sword matrix. Yi Futian stretched out both his arms and in an instant, the sword in the matrix materialized in front of him and Yaya, turning into a sword diagram. The battle axe's cleaving strike was unable to cleave it apart. At the same time, The giant sword in the distance hummed and turned into a ray of light and floated in front of Futian. It was as though the sword was able to sense everything that happened. Futian stretched out his hand and grabbed the sword with both hands. In an instant, waves of sword will emanated from his body. Harming your own kin, die, Futian said coldly as a brilliant light erupted from the sword matrix and countless sword will flew towards Li Kaishan, impaling him. No. Li Kaishan's expression was pale as a sheet and his eyes were filled with horror. The sword light drowned out everything and Li Kaishan's body faded to nothingness. Nothing was left of his corpse. Many people watched the scene with pounding hearts. Li Kaishan had died. Futian had activated the sword matrix and with Yaya's cooperation he had taken control of the sword matrix. Rumble. A terrifying sound was heard as the chess saint's huge body broke free bit by bit from the sword matrix. As it looked like he was about to break free, a shocking force erupted and he looked coldly at Futian. At the same time, a giant chessboard appeared behind him. It was the Great Path chessboard. Futian and Yaya flew into the air, the sword diagram following alongside them. Soon, a sword diagram capable of blotting out the sun appeared in the air and grew bigger, engulfing the entire area. The sword matrix of the void has appeared, someone commented. Rays of blinding light scattered down, but the sword lights instilled the feeling of death in them. Go, someone shouted and immediately retreated. Now, the entire sword matrix had been moved into the air, allowing them temporary relief from danger. Not just that, all the sword chi in the nether sword mound had assimilated into the matrix in the air, its light shining down on the earth. How could this be? Zhou Zi and the others had extremely grim expressions. The sword matrix of the void being controlled by Futian was definitely not a situation they wanted to see. Although many people from the great Zhou sacred dynasty had died, they still hoped that Lu Zong would be able to take control of the sword matrix of the void and assist the chess saint in escaping. Go, Zhou Du also said. If they did not leave, there would not be another chance. This sword matrix was strong enough to destroy the entire nether sword mound. Lu Zong also turned around and left. He was incapable of turning the current situation around. Futian, you can sacrifice Tombkeeper Village. Use the sword matrix of the void to assist the chess saint and establish good relations with Shihua Sacred Mountain and Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. Alternatively, you could continue what you are doing. What is your choice? Lu Zong said. At this moment, the chess saint was completely free. The sword matrix beside him had also been devoured by the sword matrix of the void, so he no longer needed to destroy the matrix to break free. The Great Path chessboard appeared behind his body and he stared at Futian. A blade of light shone on him and locked onto him. I choose, Saint Killing, Futian said coldly. As his voice landed, a blade of light appeared from the sword matrix of the void in the air. It shot through the air and lit up all the blades of light in the area. Billions of swords seemed to follow along the blade of light's descent, destroying everything in its path. Chapter 8:13, Tombkeeper Village, outside of the Nether Sword Mound. Tombkeeper Village, outside of the Nether Sword Mound. Many in the village looked up and cast their gaze in the direction of the Nether Sword Mound in awe. A huge, seemingly boundless sword diagram appeared in midair, covering the place that was usually gloomy and dark. One look was all it took to make their hearts tremble. This is... The hearts of the villagers of Tombkeeper Village almost leaped out of their chests. Many mighty ones from sacred grounds outside were just as taken aback as those from the village when they saw the frightening sight before them. What is that? Does the Nether Sword Mound actually have a sword matrix of the void? So the Nether Sword Mound has actually been activated? An ancient aura permeated the place. Terrifying might shrouded the entire village, covering a huge swath of area. Look out, someone said. If such terrifying powers were to burst, no one knew what would have happened afterwards. It would have been fine if the direction of the attack was controlled, but if the attack was to lose control and come for them, there was probably no one capable of fending off such attacks. The village chief remained standing quietly at the entrance of the sword mound. His hands shook slightly as he looked at the events unfolding far away. He took a deep breath after closing his eyes. His eyes turned to look rather manic when they opened again. After all these years, the sword matrix of the void is finally activated again. This is all just so perfect. He had incredible luck for being able to find someone capable of beating Yaya in the 9-state forum. Better still, there was someone even more suitable for the task other than Yu Sheng, and that was none other than Yi Futian. Yi Futian came to his village, completing all that he had expected to accomplish. He looked forward eagerly to the future. At the Nether Sword Mound, the chess saint came to feel the unforgiving, earth-shaking, devastating power. He finally felt fear for the first time. He never felt such fear, even when he had been trapped by the sword matrices back then. But at the moment he felt pure fear. It was a power that was more than enough to destroy him. Everything before his eyes was covered by swords. He shouted in anger and sent the great path chessboard forward. At the same time, he fled by streaking through the space at terrifying speed. However, that intense sword beam and the billions of swords in the air destroyed the chessboard effortlessly. The swords, which were capable of destroying everything in their path, ignored the distance between them and their target. Streaks of boundlessly terrifying sword beams penetrated the chess saint's body, striking him right through his head. The chess saint stopped right there and then. The ones running below turned around and saw that scene that was shining brilliantly. The matrix diagram emanated endless light in the sky. An unparalleled beam of light of the sword gathered at the center of the great path sword diagram, streaking through the space and penetrating the chess saint's huge saintly body. At that moment, the saint's body was lit up by the light of the sword. Incredible terror and despair were seen on his usually composed face. Even a saint would have felt fear. The god of death had paid him a visit. The chess saint, one of the handfuls of saints to be found in his generation, would soon perish right there and then. He had never expected the one to break the matrix would be Yi Futian. If he knew all that, there would have been no need to choose Lu Zong to lay out the chess game and have his own students killed. If he knew what would have happened, he would have chosen Yi Futian, the man who would have freed him. The chess saint might have even been able to catch a glimpse of the true secrets of the sword matrix of the void. Everything in the world was a game of chess, and he wanted to be the one placing the pieces. But right now, who is the one ended up being the piece indeed? And who is the one to lay out the game? Who is that Yaya? Why would Yi Futian and Yaya appear at the same time in the Nether Sword Mound? Is all of this just a coincidence? No, it can't be. This is a game and there must be someone playing the game behind the scenes. I'm not a player. I'm now but a piece on the board. Thoughts poured into the chess saint's mind. Those were his last thoughts. His body gradually turned into light and dissipated under the incredibly bright light of the sword. The only saint of chess of his time, the #1 master in matrices in all of the 9 states, perished in the Nether Sword Mound, killed by one of the younger generations using the sword matrix of the void. The chess saint had perished. Countless sword will continue to rain from the sword diagram hovering in midair. It covered the entire Nether Sword Mound. Swords rained from the sky and stabbed into the ground. The ones fleeing below brought everything they had as their defense to prevent getting caught up in the crossfire. The sword matrix of the void's only target was the chess saint, and whatever was raining down on the others was simply aftershock. Despite the aftershock having only a very small amount of power, it was still frightening for those that had to deal with it. Golden Phoenix protection. Zhou Du shouted. The people of the great Zhou sacred dynasty gathered around and activated their ritual implements, bringing their greatest power to bear. A boundlessly huge golden phoenix shadow appeared above their heads, serving as a shield. The people of the other sacred grounds went on to do the same. Some had even brought holy items to defend against incoming attacks. Even so, there were still those who were unable to flee in time, killed by the rain of swords from above. Swords rained down over the vast interior of the Nether Sword Mound. Everyone from Tombkeeper Village was able to see the rain of swords, and they trembled violently within. That light of the sword that cleaved through the heavens, was that the power of the Nether Sword Mound? Who did that sword attack kill? Yi Futian remained standing in midair. He felt the power of the nether sword mound dissipating, turning into boundless sword will, which was then turned into a rain of swords, falling down onto the sword mound itself. The light of the sword matrix diagram gradually dimmed. Yaya's body floated down below, and she surprisingly sat at the center of the sword matrix. In the sky behind her, ancient sword will was seen coursing in the eye of the blood-colored sword. A sword matrix was reforged yet again with her at the center. Frightening sword will emanated from within and flowed into Yaya's body. Everything seemed to have quieted down, returning to the prime point. Futian turned around and took a look at the sword's eye. His eyes were incredibly sharp as he activated freedom meditation as if he were to see everything there was inside the sword's eye. However, he only sensed a frightening, ancient power within, as if yet another sword matrix lied within the eye. Where is the true nether sword mound? He flashed and went down to a corner. Two figures were seen lying there, the eldest student of the chess saint, Yang Xiao, and the youngest, Jiao Gongzi. The chess saint eventually sacrificed Yang Xiao and the others in order to escape, but his action triggered the ultimate sword matrix, devouring the one that had him trapped. As such, Yang Xiao was not killed right on the spot. When the sword matrix of the void attacked, that corner had been in a blind spot, which spared Yang Xiao from being hit by the aftershock. In actuality, if the people of the other sacred grounds did not scamper outside in a panic and had instead hid beneath Yang Xiao, they would have been safer. But then again, there was simply no one who dared to stay around in that kind of situation. They've still got a chance. Phoenix. Futian sensed their life force and called. Phoenix came to his side to check on the extent of their injuries. Yang Zhao's injuries were incredibly severe. Worse still, his body had been penetrated all over by the sword will. The actions of the chess saint, which resulted in his wife's death, had practically sent him over the edge psychologically. He was in a bad shape, both body and mind. Jiao Gongzi, on the other hand, was deemed too weak to be worth being used by the chess saint. As such, his condition was better than his eldest brother. He is the one in the worst state, Phoenix said in a low voice. Do whatever you can, Futian said. 7 of the 9 students of the chess saint were killed by their teacher. The remaining eldest and youngest were gravely injured. Yang Xiao was an incredibly renowned figure. He was the city lord of the city lord office of Yujing City, as well as a mighty one ranked on the sage and saint ranking. His powers were, as such, formidable, and he was definitely one of the top figures at the sage plane. He had been unable to hold on for long in the matrix of the chess saint, but he would not have survived if he lesser training and power. But at the moment, he had been used as a sacrifice by his teacher, and his wife was dead. All his other brothers and sisters were gone. It was a harrowing catastrophe that would have dealt a huge blow to anyone. Yeah. Phoenix nodded and took out a pill, feeding it to Yang Xiao. Strong life signs manifested within her body. Jade green light covered Yang Xiao and seeped into his body bit by bit. My power of rules of life is rather weak, Phoenix said to Futian. Futian placed his hands on Yang Xiao's body as well. Streaks of green ancient branches glittered as they appeared, covering Yang Zhao's body. Futian's life spirit, the world tree, had saved him from death once, and he hoped it would work on Yang Xiao as well. Senior Yang, while your teacher and Li Kaishan might be dead, this perhaps might not be the end of your vengeance, Futian said to Yang Xiao. If Yang Xiao had no intention to come back to the living, there might be no way to actually bring him back. Yang Zhao's arm shuddered. Futian felt that and his eyes sparkled. He then continued, because of his status, I was unable to kill him then. I beg your forgiveness. If Yang Xiao was able to hear Futian, he would know who Futian was talking about. Who was it who brought Yang Xiao and the others to break the matrix? Who was it who led the 9 students of the chess saint into the sacrificial matrix? At the moment, both Lu Zong and Zhou Zi, great figures of the major sacred grounds, were completely unscathed. Anyone who had been following the events knew that it had been Lu Zong's ploy all along. He knew what would happen and laid out everything. If he proved incapable of breaking the matrix, he planned to sacrifice the others to help the chess saint escape. Although Futian knew what happened, There was simply no way he could have killed Lu Zong in front of all those from the other sacred grounds. Unless he was willing to kill everyone else. But if he were to do so, there was no way his party would have survived. If he were to do so, it would not just be them in trouble, but the entire Holy Ji Palace would have probably suffered the wrath of other sacred grounds, bringing about their doom. There were things that no matter how much one wanted to do it, they just could not bring themselves to do it. There would perhaps be answers when they were able to make it outside. Yang Zhao's eyes opened after a while, staring at the sky. His eyes were filled with blood and were incredibly cold. There was no emotion in them, only a thirst for revenge. "Senior," Yi Futian called. "You're right. I will live." Yang Zhao's voice sounded very calm, but Yi Futian knew what that calmness meant. It was a manifestation of his mind's resolve and nothing else. Yang Xiao wanted to live. He wanted revenge. The chess saint died. Li Kaishan died. But Lu Zong was still alive. His teacher was the one who set them up, and Lu Zong had been an accomplice. It was a blood debt that he was determined to claim. Chapter 8:14. Both Yang Xiao and Jiao Gongzi woke up. Both Yang Xiao and Jiao Gongzi woke up. Yi Futian did not console them and did not know how to go about it. The only thing that could wash away their pain was time. However, he stayed, and Yaya remained seated under the sword eye to train. The huge sword fell behind her. Boundless sword will emanating from the sword eye coursed through her body, seemingly cleansing her. Yi Futian came behind the huge sword and took to the air. He put his hand on the sword and closed his eyes, beginning to sense one sword matrix after another. The sword was capable of shamanic arts. "Wuchen, Suke, this place is very suitable for you swordsmen to train in. Get a good feel of the place. That big sword will help you further your progress in the art of the sword." Yi Futian then added, "Other than that, this space is one of rules. Everyone will benefit from training through sensing the powers all over the place." As speculated by everyone from the sacred grounds, the place was definitely a sacred place for training. Yaya had entered a mystical state, and there was no need for him to be in a hurry to leave. He wanted to stay behind and see what would happen to Yaya. He had some speculations about things himself, and he thought his speculations to be correct. But from the looks of things at the moment, he was not completely right about things. He might have actually been wrong. Things were more complicated than he had anticipated. The words the village chief said to him remained seeming to be half-truths. Everyone present nodded. After experiencing the ordeals in the 9-state forum and everything in the Nether Sword Mound, everyone had developed a deep comprehension of things. Even those who had not broken into the Sage Plane were only a step away from doing so. What a cultivator experienced during battle, as well as in life and death situations, served to further their comprehension in a lot of things. That was why pilgrimages were an essential part of every cultivator's training. Yi Futian turned to look at the direction outside the sword mound. The chess saint's death seemed to have marked the end to their ordeal. But has everything about this truly ended? No, it can't be this easy. Why are the people of the other sacred grounds here? None of the ones from the other sacred grounds got what they came for. They suffered grave losses instead. Some from the various sacred grounds remained behind after exiting the sword mound while others left, returning to whence they came. The Tombkeeper village's peace seemed to have been restored. However, such peace seemed to be the calm before a storm more than anything else. Mighty ones from Shihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty came to Tombkeeper village a month later. Furthermore, the entourage this time was far larger than the last. The Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had mobilized an elite Golden Phoenix army and had the village surrounded. At the same time, elegant phoenix carriages descended above Shihua Sacred Mountain of Futian City of the eastern state. Some mighty ones of the Shihua Sacred Mountain attempted to stop them, but they were unable to help but make way, seeing who was on the vehicle, letting the carriage into the mountain. Saint Shihua and the Rain Saint were playing chess within the mountain. The carriage was seen descending from above, and the Zhou Sacred King stepped out. His eyes were sharp and his bearing stern and magnificent. He glanced at Saint Shihua with cold eyes and said, "I take it that you knew what Lu Zong did before the fact, Saint Shihua?" The Rain Saint stood up and yielded his seat to the Sacred King. Saint Shihua said to the Zhou Sacred King, "Have a seat, Sacred King." The Sacred King's eyes shone with golden flashes as he glared at Saint Shihua before taking the seat across him. "Sacred King, sacrifices are inevitable to accomplish great things." The Chess Saint was trapped in the Matrix, and he was the one who knew the Nether Sword Mound best. Rescuing the Chess Saint would have made him owe his life to us. Furthermore, the Chess Saint had promised certain things as well. That, coupled with the Nether Sword Mound that he would have gotten, would have made the Sky Saint and the Glass Saint irrelevant in the Eastern State. Saint Shihua added further, "I take it that you intend to restore the great Zhou sacred dynasty to its former glory, no? You have deceived me, Saint. Are you saying that you do not have any personal agendas with this matter?" The Sacred King said coldly, "I promised, here in the Sacred Mountain, back then that Lu Zong would become your son-in-law. With you of the great Zhou sacred dynasty working with me, we would build a stronger Eastern state. Other than not having told you about the sacrifices that might have incurred, what else do you think I would not tell you?" Saint Shihua then added, "It was a pity that the operation ended in failure. I'm sure you know what happened in the Nether Sword Mound. The place is truly a sacred ground for training, and there is the sword matrix of the void in it. Lu Zong's plans would have succeeded, but it was ruined when things were going well." The great Zhou Sacred King's expression turned sharp. He knew that Yi Futian had activated the sword matrix of the void, killing the Chess Saint inside the sword mound, almost killing everyone from the 9 states in it as well. The people of the Barren State had first showed their mettle in the 9-state forum, and then they went on to take control of the Nether Sword Mound. It was truly an ironic turn of events. The Barren State, which was almost forgotten, accomplished what the ones from the Eastern States set out to accomplish but failed. The Sacred King did not speak, but the cold emanating from his body said everything. "I know that you want to keep this under wraps and that the Golden Phoenix army consisted of the royalty of the Sacred Dynasty. But we from the Shihua Sacred Mountain suffered losses as well, and they too were formidable and important people. But then again, Lu Zong knew what he was doing nonetheless." Saint Shihua continued, "If you think that you're getting the short end of the deal in this, how about you take care of this from here on out, Sacred King?" The Sacred King glanced at Saint Shihua and said, "All right." He took to the sky and returned to his carriage as soon as he finished. He then left without delay. Saint Shihua smiled as he watched the Sacred King leave. The Sacred King is still the Sacred King I know. He never really changed at all. The Sacred King seems to like to throw his weight around, the Rain Saint at the side said. "It's normal. We didn't tell him everything after all, so it's only natural for him to find it hard to trust me," Saint Shihua said. "You'd really have the Sacred King take care of things from here on out?" the Rain Saint asked. "I keep having the feeling that the chief of that Tombkeeper village is not someone to be trifled with," Saint Shihua said. "Have both of the Sword Saints serving beneath the Sword Saint of the Void died?" The Rain Saint's eyes sparkled. Saint Shihua then added, "We'll see. From the way the Sacred King goes about things, the village won't be able to hide whatever secrets they have from him." More and more people came to Tombkeeper village. The sword matrix of the void re-emerged in the world, and many major sacred grounds sent people to the remote place, which also happened to lie at the borders of 4 different states. The village had never seen such a huge crowd. Many were worried. Things really turned out to be as the village chief said. Tombkeeper village was truly at its life or death moment. Several months passed since the Chess Saint perished, and many from sacred grounds of all 9 states were exasperated. The saint had died a truly unceremonious death. At the moment, the entrance to the Nether Sword Mound had been taken over by people from various sacred grounds, yet none dared to venture into the Sword Mound itself. What happened several months ago became common knowledge. Almost everyone died within. The sword matrix of the void had been activated, and the survivors were only able to make it out within the brief window when the matrix dissipated, after appearing for a brief moment. However, many were still almost killed by the aftershock of the terrifying matrix. A brilliant, dazzling phoenix carriage descended from the sky on that day. One figure after another took to the skies. All of them wore glittering golden phoenix robes and greeted the one who came from the sky. All hail the sacred king. Solemn voices were heard above Tombkeeper village, which made the people of the village tremble. A saint had descended upon the Tombkeeper village. The sacred king walked out from the carriage and scanned the ground below. Many from other sacred grounds cupped their hands and greeted, "Greetings, sacred king." It was common for people of sacred grounds to greet a saint, even if said saint was not of their own. The sacred king nodded and shrouded the village with his will. He then turned his eyes in a particular direction. He took one step forward and disappeared in a beam of golden light from where he was standing. The carriage moved towards the direction the beam disappeared, following the sacred king. Many stood outside the compound where the village chief lived. A beam flashed and the sacred king descended, appearing above where the old village chief was. The sacred king cast his gaze at the chief. "I did not expect to be graced with your presence, sacred king," the old chief said as he looked at the sacred king, but his tone lacked respect despite his words. The eyes of the sacred king glittered with golden, sharp flashes, seeming about to penetrate everything. An extremely terrifying power fell onto the old chief, who frowned but showed little changes in his expression otherwise. He stared at the sacred king and asked, "What would you mean by this, sacred king?" "You are indeed something," the sacred king said coldly. He dropped from the sky and came to stand before the old chief and asked, "Who's that brat? And what's with that sword?" "If you want to know, you'd only need to venture inside the nether sword mound." "I've never been inside, so I'd never know," the chief said plainly. "I've heard that there were two formidable servants of the sword serving the sword saint of the void all those years ago, and both of them were saints themselves. Where would they be now?" The sacred king continued to ask, "Would they be right before me, or would they be within the sword mound?" The old chief stared at the sacred king with sharp eyes. That's really the sacred king of the great Zhou sacred dynasty indeed. A holier-than-thou lord of a sacred dynasty, ruling vast territories and demanding worship from all living beings. Do you think everything will be fine if you say nothing and they keep themselves inside? The sacred king added coldly, "There were many from the great Zhou sacred dynasty who died in the nether sword mound. But what does that have to do with Tombkeeper village?" the village chief asked. "It has something to do with that brat, and that sword as well," the sacred king answered coldly. He then turned around to look at those who came from the great Zhou sacred dynasty and said coldly, "You've all been here for many days. What have you all done?" "My king, we've looked through everyone in the village. Many are formidable people, but the village chief remains an unknown. No one knew anything about his training. The parents of that brat are common people, knowing little of cultivation." Someone from the side bowed and said, "Are they taken?" the sacred king asked. "It can be done any time," the one at the side bowed and answered. "Could you have them come out on their own?" the sacred king asked the old chief coldly. The magnificent great Zhou sacred king would threaten the younger generations of others with the lives of common folk then? The old chief glared at the sacred king coldly. "Threaten?" The sacred king glared at the old chief with extremely sharp eyes and added, "I, the great Zhou sacred king, will need to resort to threats with you people? Kill them." A cold shout reverberated throughout the surroundings with incredible killing intent, horrifying all of the villagers and making their hearts jump. "Indeed, sacred king," reply came from afar, and shrieks were heard from elsewhere. The village chief's expression turned extremely cold as he glared at the figure before him. The people from various sacred grounds trembled. The sovereign of the great Zhou sacred dynasty was indeed a brutal, overbearing one. "I'll ask you one more time, are they coming out or not?" the great Zhou sacred king glared at the old chief and asked. Chapter 8:15. Two dead bodies lay covered in blood outside a small house somewhere in Tombkeeper village. Two dead bodies lay covered in blood outside a small house somewhere in Tombkeeper village. At the same time, one figure after another flashed. They were all dressed plainly but burst with incredibly powerful auras at the same time, surrounding the mighty ones who had just killed the two. At the same time, hundreds of people burst with powerful auras. One figure after another took to the air with intimidating force. However, none from the great Zhou sacred dynasty were fettered. The Golden Phoenix army took to the sky, and golden lights burst in their surroundings. One shadow of phoenixes after another burst with brilliant light as they stood off against the villagers. A mere village would not have been able to stand up against the invincible army of the great Zhou sacred dynasty, no matter how powerful those villagers were. The intruders held back and dared not move against the villagers as the sacred king was not there yet. However, with the sacred king of the great Zhou sacred dynasty himself appearing in the village and giving orders, there was simply no one among the intruders who dared defy him. The mighty ones from the various sacred grounds watched the incident within Tombkeeper village unfold with troubled looks. The village was indeed formidable for daring to stand against the great Zhou sacred dynasty in such a manner. Do these villagers have any idea how powerful the great Zhou sacred dynasty is? The sacred dynasty had a long, deep history and had once ruled all over the eastern state. They were a force reigning supreme all over the eastern state, and they would not be so easily intimidated. Furthermore, there were also mighty ones from Xihua Sacred Mountain there. They seemed to have formed an alliance with the Golden Phoenix army of the great Zhou sacred dynasty, surrounding the mighty ones from the village. Of course, more people were more concerned with how things with the village chief would unfold. Tombkeeper village was formidable, and coupled with the sword matrix of the void that killed the chess saint from before, there was no one from all over the 9 states who did not know that the village had secrets. The village probably had someone with formidable powers, and he might be someone who served the sword saint of the void all those years ago. At the moment in that compound, the village chief and the great Zhou sacred king were glaring at each other. Peculiar winds appeared around them, sweeping up the leaves on the ground. While mighty ones from the great Zhou sacred dynasty had infiltrated the village and monitored the movements of the villagers, they did not do anything that was really over the edge. However, the sacred king himself had ordered his men to kill people as soon as he came. He was forcing Yi Futian, Yaya, and the others to come out immediately. You know that I'm a saint then, yet you behave so insolently nonetheless. The village chief's expression was incredibly cold. A saintly aura emanated from his body and shrouded all of Tombkeeper village in an instant. Everyone was able to feel the saint will at that very moment. The people from the sacred dynasty all looked on with sharp expressions. They had already guessed so. The village chief of Tombkeeper village hidden at the borders of 4 states was truly a saint. But then again, there was nothing to be feared as their sacred king was with them. The great Zhou sacred dynasty feared no one and no force in all of the vast lands of the eastern state. Such confidence stemmed from their bearing as royalties of the sacred dynasty. The people from all over the 9 states were somewhat shaken, but they remained largely unfettered. The sacred king was completely unfazed. His eyes remained sharp as he glared at the one before him metamorphosing. The bearing of the village chief was thoroughly transformed. The plain, unassuming, and even somewhat ragged image from before had completely disappeared, now replaced with boundless might and sharpness. His robe billowed in the wind, and boundless sword will was seen in his eyes, lashing out at the great Zhou sacred king. You might be a saint, but so what? The sacred king's tone remained unflinching and overbearing. An all-encompassing might swept all over their surroundings and overpowered the entire village. He said coldly, "A mere sword servant of the sword saint of the void from back then dares to defy me. If they are to remain cooped up inside the nether sword mound, I will have no qualms about slaughtering the entire village. By the way, have you readied a grave for yourself?" The more powerful one's training became, the greater the difference between each plane became. Even small differences within the same level became very apparent. As such, the power differences between saints were extremely huge. It was for that reason that Xihua Sacred Mountain silently allowed Lu Zong to help the chess saint get out of his predicament, having no fear of the chess saint turning back on his word later. That was because the chess saint did not have what it would take to stand against Xihua Sacred Mountain. Due to such reasons, it was impossible for the great Zhou Sacred King to fear a mere sword servant, even if the sword servant was one who had once served the sword saint of the void. He was a sacred king while his opponent was but a sword servant. You're right indeed. I'm a saint, so what? The chess saint was a saint, and where is he now? The chief said coldly. The great Zhou sacred king smirked as he glanced at his opponent. Is he trying to threaten me? While I do not know what secrets lie between Tombkeeper Village and the sword mound of the saint, I'm able to speculate from past events that even if the sword saint of the void was to be reborn, he wouldn't have been able to continuously activate the sword matrix of the void, no? Just how much power had accumulated in the nether sword mound that Yi Futian was able to use the sword matrix of the void in such a manner? The great Zhou sacred king then said coldly, so you were there at the 9-state forum to search for one worthy of succeeding the sword matrix of the void? Or did you have something else in mind? You want to know? The chief glared at the sacred king and asked. I must know, the sacred king answered in an overbearing tone. He wanted more than just knowing. He wanted to take the ones inside the sword mound. They're already out. You'll have your answer soon enough, the chief said while glaring at the sacred king. The eyes of the sacred king sparkled as his will traveled through the space, heading straight for the entrance of the sword mound. A group of people was indeed seen making their way out of there, heading elsewhere. The group of people was none other than Yi Futian and his party. Yaya was there as well. They seemed to catch wind of what was happening outside and were traveling somewhere with extreme speed. That somewhere was none other than the place where the murder of the 2 villagers happened. Yi Futian and his people appeared outside the small house soon enough, seeing the dead bodies lying in a pool of blood. Dad. While Yaya already knew something bad had happened, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning after seeing the dead bodies. Her mind turned blank, and she walked up to them in a dazed manner before kneeling down, tears streaking down from her eyes uncontrollably. Yi Futian also walked up, feeling dazed, and looked at the dead bodies with a dumbfounded look on his face. He had spent the end of last year ushering in the new year and had a great time with them. Yet, at that moment, both of them were reduced to cold, dead bodies lying on the ground. Blood filled Yi Futian's eyes as he clenched his fists, exuding murderous intent all over. Uncle Zhang and Aunt Zhang knew little of cultivation, and they were common villagers of Tombkeeper Village. Why do this to them? Yi Futian looked up and cast a cold glance at the Golden Phoenix army in the air above him and asked coldly, Who did this? I did. A voice was heard, and 2 figures were seen descending from above at the same time. They were none other than the Sacred King and the village chief. The Sacred King glanced at Yi Futian and Yaya. According to Zhou Du and the others, it was they who activated the sword matrix of the void. Yi Futian and Yaya were both keys to the situation at hand, as well as the sword. Yi Futian was in charge of the matrix and activated it. The sword summoned boundless sword will while Yaya served as the core of the matrix like a spiritual body. Yi Futian looked up at the Sacred King and asked, Why? You're questioning me? The Sacred King glanced at Yi Futian coldly. His eyes were filled with incredible might. Yi Futian looked at the Sacred King, who was clad in an overbearing might, emanating an aura of supreme rulers all over him, intimidating all who looked at him. During the 9-state forum, be it the saints or the mighty ones from all sacred grounds, all of them sat politely on their seats. This caused many to have the misconception that the top-class figures of all 9 states were peaceful beings. However, what happened at that very moment seemed to be telling him that the 9-state forum was but a ceremony held jointly by all 9 states. The 9 states themselves were actually cruel. The chess saint was willing to kill his students just so to set himself free. The Sacred King had no qualms about massacring innocents to reach his goals. Those the top figures in their most real state. Just like the chess saint said, the great path has no place for sentiment. The Sacred King, a ruler of a sacred dynasty, had little regard for life and did not care about the lives of 2 common folks. You killed the chess saint in the nether sword mound and cared nothing for the people from other sacred grounds, while you had your way with breaking the matrices. That caused many from the sacred grounds to lose their lives, no? The Sacred King asked coldly. Everyone who ventured into the nether sword mound was from sacred grounds. They put their lives on the line to do so, and everyone did what they had to do to break the matrices. We from the barren state were the same. It was only natural that I could not have simply sat around and done nothing while the chess saint wanted my life. Yi Futian answered coldly and then asked, "What does any of this have to do with you, sacred king? The Eastern state had several saints, and you behaved as if nothing happened after killing a saint yourself. Those from the sacred grounds who perished were all people of the great Zhou sacred dynasty. What do you think?" The sacred king answered coldly. The chess saint was a saint of the Eastern state. You, as the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State, dared to use the matrix to kill a saint of the Eastern state. You were being utterly insolent, some mighty ones from Shihua's sacred mountain said. Yi Futian found Lu Zong and the rest were among the crowd from Shihua's sacred mountain. You unleashed the sword matrix of the void and ended up killing many yourself, some mighty ones from the Hall of Holy Light said, trying to intimidate Yi Futian. Yi Futian scanned the crowd before him and smirked all of a sudden, feeling the irony of it all. The Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State is part of the orthodoxy of Emperor Xia, just like you all are. So you're telling me that the chess saint wants my life, the life of a palace lord, and yet I'm not allowed to retaliate? Furthermore, are you all saying that I, as the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace, venturing into the Nether Sword Mound, had to ensure the safety of the people of other sacred grounds to do so? Yi Futian glanced at the crowd again and said, "You people could really say anything to put all the blame on me. The chess saint said that cultivation along the great path means taking from others. It seems that every one of you believes that with every fiber of your being, but you all differ from the chess saint by being more pretentious than he was." He knew without a doubt what those people wanted to take. Take him. The sacred king no longer bothered talking to Yi Futian and gave his order coldly. Mighty ones from the Golden Phoenix army stepped forward as soon as he finished. One figure after another stepped forward beside Yi Futian. Zhuge Qingfeng, Yuan Zhan, and the others came before Yi Futian. As fellow members of the sacred grounds of the 9 states, I don't think you have the right to take the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State, sacred king, the village chief, who had been standing at the side, said. The Barren State has no saint. Can the Holy Ji Palace even be called a sacred ground? The sacred king said coldly, I will call upon Emperor Xia personally. As for you, I'll deal with you later. The village chief glanced at the sacred king and said, the people of sacred grounds of all 9 states ventured into the ruins left behind by the sword saint of the void. None of you were capable of breaking the matrices back then, so it was only a given that none of you had the right to inherit the ruins. I followed the sacred order given to me by the sword saint of the void, that the one capable of breaking the matrix would be given the right to inherit the sword matrix of the void. We of Tombkeeper Village will follow the successor of the matrix. From this moment forth, the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State will have a saint among them. Tombkeeper Village is part of the Holy Ji Palace. Chapter 8:16. As the village chief finished speaking, it suddenly grew quiet. As the village chief finished speaking, it suddenly grew quiet. Tombkeeper Village had joined the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State. Yi Futian, who had become an apostle of the Sword Saint of the Void, inherited the first sword matrix of the 9 states, the Nether Sword Matrix. Just as everyone had guessed, the old village chief had departed from the Barren State to select an heir. Now all the cultivators of the Saint Plane who belonged to the Sword Saint of the Void followed Yi Futian. From this point onwards, the Barren State had saints. The Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State was a holy land, and therefore eligible to attract cultivators from across the lands. The Barren State would become the first holy land in history whose palace lord was not of the Saint Plane yet ruled over saints in his dominion. In all of the 9 states, those in charge of the holy lands were cultivators of the Saint Plane. After all, this was the world of cultivators. The village chief's words affirmed Yi Futian's inheritance and also sanctified the Barren State. Other holy places would no longer have any reason to mess with Yi Futian. As the palace lord, he and other parties of the Holy Land had come together to breach the matrix. He had been successful and inherited the Nether Sword Matrix. What more could the others say? Yi Futian did not feel anything out of the ordinary and was not surprised that the village chief was a saint. The day before the decision was made, the village chief had talked to him. He wanted to know everything before he decided whether or not to enter the restricted area, and while the village chief had not told him everything, he told him about the Saint Plane. He had promised that as long Yi Futian participated in the rescue and breached the matrix within the Nether Sword Mound, the barren state would have saints and benefit from his protection. So Yi Futian made the executive decision to participate in the rescue. Just like Sage Wanxiang's divinatory symbols had foretold, the odds were unfavorable. But there was a chance of misfortune. The odds were unfavorable not only because of the dangers inside the restricted area but also because of the pressure from other holy lands after they came out of the matrix. Yi Futian had already considered this. He dared not decide the fate of those around him with such ease. If not for the words of village chief, it would still be difficult for Yi Futian to make a decision. There was nothing wrong with what Zhou Zi had said before. Without saints, the barren state would never have the right to speak and therefore would never gain any respect. Yi Futian had not just participated in the rescue to influence it, but also to fight for the future of barren state. And he had done so. Although Yi Futian was almost killed by the chess saint, he had survived by using one of his 9 lives and dispatched his opponent. But he had not expected the great Zhou sacred king to be so despotic and cold-blooded, murdering Yaya's parents, who were no more than ordinary citizens. I, Yi Futian, Palace Lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State, announced that Tombkeeper Village is henceforth under the jurisdiction of the Holy Ji Palace. The village chief of Tombkeeper Village is now an elder of the Holy Ji Palace, Yi Futian coldly announced, while staring at the great Zhou sacred king with indifference. From now on, the Holy Ji Palace of Barren State would no longer be the only holy land without saints. The Barren State and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty were now of equal status. This is the border of the Eastern State. Tombkeeper Village is on the land of the Eastern State, Great Zhou Sacred King said, his eyes fixed on Yi Futian. All of the 9 states are the orthodoxy of Emperor Xia, even the Eastern State and the Barren State. Yi Futian continued to watch Great Zhou Sacred King. Tombkeeper Village will be relocated to the Barren State. You expect this matter to be so easily settled just because you say Tombkeeper Village will join the Barren State? Zhou Ya remarked icily. Yi Futian cast an indifferent look at Zhou Ya and said, "When I, the Palace Lord, speak with the great Zhou Sacred King, there is no place for you to comment." Zhou Ya's expression stiffened and he regarded Yi Futian with a steely glare. When he had challenged Yi Futian, he'd simply been dismissed due to his inferior rank. Now, Yi Futian once again arrogantly referred to himself as a palace lord. Did he really believe that just because the barren state now had saints, his position would be equal to theirs? Or that he could further compare himself to the great Zhou sacred king? At that moment another figure walked to Yi Futian's side, and all eyes turned to the new arrival. It was Yang Xiao, the strong sage cultivator of sage and saint ranking. A disciple does not speak of his master's faults. However, my master, the chess saint, lost his humanity and sacrificed the lives of my wife and brothers to save himself. My wife and younger brothers, as well as other cultivators from Xihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Dynasty, died because of him. He was not fit to be a saint, and his death meant nothing. What Palace Lord Yi did was righteous. I believe that even if Palace Lord Yi had not taken action, Xihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred King would have put an end to the chess saint. If the Great Zhou Sacred King would like to pursue the person responsible, it should be the chess saint. Yang Xiao continued, "From today on, I, Yang Xiao, wish to cultivate at the Holy Ji Palace at the Barren State. If Emperor Xia does not understand, I will follow Palace Lord Yi to testify about what happened." Everyone who entered the Nether Sword Mound from the 9 states also witnessed what happened with their own eyes. Yang Zhao's voice was stern and emotionless, and as he spoke he cast a cold glance at Lu Zong, who stood amongst the crowd. Yang Xiao did not blame anyone except the chess saint, and it was clear to all who watched that if Great Zhou Sacred King wished to use the chess saint's death as an excuse to detain Yi Futian, it was unlikely to work. Yang Xiao would also join the Holy Ji Palace. Many watched in awe. After this, the power of the barren state would increase greatly with the addition of saints. the powerful disciples of Tombkeeper Village, and cultivators such as Yang Shao from the Sage and Saint Ranking. No one from the Barren State nor Tombkeeper Village wished harm upon anyone from the Great Zhou Dynasty. The deaths of those from the Great Zhou Dynasty were caused by Chess Saint. If Great Zhou's Sacred King wants to trace culpability in the matter, perhaps speaking to Lu Zong of the Xihua Sacred Mountain would be a good start. He was the one who advised we help rescue the Chess Saint, Yi Futian remarked without care. He then looked at those from the other holy lands. All of you are from the holy lands of the 9 states, and many of you are highly regarded elders. Have I made any false statements? The onlooker's eyes flickered. When Yi Futian activated the Nether Sword Matrix, he hadn't just possessed the power to kill the Chess Saint. Yi Futian could have killed everyone around him in the process. People of Xihua Sacred Mountain and people of the Great Zhou Dynasty had all been possible targets, but Yi Futian had not attacked them. He must have known that if he did, that it would have been an excuse for all the holy lands to oppose him. Palace Lord Yi spoke the truth. I can testify, someone from Jixia Holy Palace in Qi State said. Yi Futian looked at the speaker and saw that it was Zhuge Yi, the cultivator who participated in 9 States Forum last year as the second runner-up. It is true. Seeing that Zhuge Yi had spoken, other strong cultivators of the Jixia Holy Palace also agreed. The deaths of the people of the Great Zhou Dynasty really weren't on account of Palace Lord Ye's action. Emperor Xia should send someone to investigate the matter. At this point, those from the Xia clan also spoke up. The people of Xia clan have spoken, many secretly thought. In the 9 states, the Xia clan held a special place. Since they had spoken on the topic now, it was likely that the Great Zhou Sacred King would have no more excuses to deal with Yi Futian. That sword and that girl caused most of the deaths during the battle. Great Zhou Sacred King still refused to relent. Yi Futian looked indifferently toward the others, closed his eyes, and moved his mind. In an instant, a magnificent sword will was transmitted through the void of the faraway distance. Many people looked towards the sword will and their hearts trembled fiercely. This is the spirit of the divine sword. Soon an enormous sword had traversed the void, hurtling towards the earth with unbelievable speed. It fell straight down, causing many to quickly move out of its way before the sword landed directly in front of Yi Futian. Saint Elder. Yi Futian looked at the old village chief next to him. The old village chief levitated with both hands on the giant sword, and in an instant, there was a terrible holy authority that circled around his body. Invisible sword will instantly swept across heaven and the earth, and a sword diagram appeared to abruptly cover this vast space. If you want to know all of it, I will tell you. This sword was formed by my brother, and he was in charge of the sword matrix in the Nether Sword Mound. Yaya is the sword spirit nurtured out of the Nether Sword Matrix. They appeared together, and along with Yi Futian, were able to activate the Nether Sword. The people of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty trespassed into the restricted area, and now blame the sword? What a joke! The voice of the village chief could be heard clearly by everyone, and suddenly everything seemed to be clear. So this was how it was. The Sword Saint of the Void placed the Nether Sword Matrix here, seeking an heir, with Tombkeeper Village tasked to guard it. Yi Futian was the successor. So, is the Sacred King satisfied now? Yi Futian said while looking at the Great Zhou Sacred King. The eyes of Great Zhou Sacred King glanced coldly at him. He then turned his eyes to the village chief again. When the village chief held the sword, it felt stronger. The sword was morphed by another sword slave, and both of them had been followers of the Sword Saint of the Void. Now that they were one again, the atmosphere became increasingly intense. With a frigid snort, Great Zhou Sacred King abruptly turned and said, "Let's go." As soon as he finished and turned to leave, the people of the Great Zhou Dynasty all looked icily to Yi Futian, ready to vacate. Unexpectedly, all of this had been just to make Yi Futian look better. "Did I say that you could leave?" Yi Futian suddenly spoke, causing everyone to freeze. The eyes of everyone from the 9 states widened in shock. Today, Great Zhou Sacred King had been domineering and unrelenting in his pursuit of a reason to do away with Yi Futian and his party, attempting to forcibly seize everything that Yi Futian had gained. But everything that had happened afterward made it impossible for him to find an excuse to do so. Furthermore, he undoubtedly felt the authority and pressure that were released when the village chief held the divine sword, yielding in the face of an unwinnable fight. But now Yi Futian dared to try to detain them? Great Zhou's sacred king slowly turned his eyes, and they suddenly burst with incomparably sharp lights. A dreadful pressure of the divine path descended upon Yi Futian, heavy enough to suffocate. "Who do you think you were talking to?" Great Zhou's sacred king spoke with a cold voice, and the people of the Great Zhou dynasty stared at Yi Futian as well. Was he asking for trouble? Although the world of cultivation believes that the fist rules everything in the end, we still have to be reasonable. Yi Futian looked at Zhou's sacred king, and then his gaze returned to Yaya and the two corpses on the ground. Did the sacred king forget to give an account for the deaths of these two? Everyone looked at Yi Futian. Could this man want Great Zhou's sacred king to give him an answer? The look of many present reflected surprise. He was right that in the world of cultivators, the fist was greater than anything else, including reason. What kind of figure was Great Zhou's sacred king that he needed to give an account for ordering the execution of two civilians? What kind of account do you want? Great Zhou's sacred king stared tightly and emotionlessly at Yi Futian. It's a pity that I can't kill the Great Zhou's sacred king, and am not qualified to ask the sacred king to repay this with blood, Yi Futian calmly stated, and the hearts of many trembled. Yi Futian dared to say that he wanted to kill the Great Zhou's sacred king. This was madness like none other. On the other hand, everyone also knew that Great Zhou's sacred king would like to have Yi Futian's life if he could. But the killers will have to leave their lives here, Yi Futian slowly said, and a flash crossed the eyes of the two cultivators of the Great Zhou dynasty, their eyes sharp with concern. They had carried out the execution, and now Yi Futian wanted their lives in return? How dare you? Great Zhou's sacred king questioned, eyes fixed on Yi Futian. To execute the people of the Great Zhou dynasty in front of him? Saint Elder, if I died at the hands of the sacred king, would you end the lives of all who are present from the Great Zhou dynasty? Yi Futian asked. Yes, the village chief responded indifferently. Very well. Yi Futian nodded calmly. People of all the holy lands of the 9 states shall bear witness today. Those who kill shall, in turn, be killed. Execute. As his voice fell, incomparably radiant streams of light rained down from within the sword diagram, too fast to react to. 2 loud crunches were heard, and in the direction of the Great Zhou dynasty, the bodies of the 2 strong cultivators were torn to pieces. Chapter 8:17, Too Fast. With the help of the sword diagram, cultivators of Saint Plain could kill with just 1 strike. Too fast. With the help of the sword diagram, cultivators of Saint Plain could kill with just 1 strike. The sword diagram breathing blew out a terrible radiance that enveloped everyone within. Tombkeeper village was extremely quiet at the moment. Executed. Yi Futian directly ordered the execution of the people of the Great Zhou sacred dynasty. Murderers must pay with their lives. And in front of Great Zhou's sacred king. If he had died on this day, he had authorized the village chief to smite everyone except the Great Zhou's sacred king. No one had known that he would be so reckless. Based on his strength and his status as the sacred king of a sacred dynasty, the Great Zhou sacred king had ordered the killing of 2 civilians as easily as stepping on ants. Who dared to disagree? But on this day, the ruthless Great Zhou sacred king met his match with this youngest lord of a holy land within the 9 states, a young man who dared to challenge the authority of saints. Countless people looked at the young man who stood tall and proud. This palace lord, who was once polite and courteous at the 9 States Forum, was the youngest ever palace lord in the history of Holy Ji Palace. Some could even say that he was the youngest leader of all the holy lands of 9 states. At the 9 States Forum, everyone saw his unparalleled talent, but today everyone saw his mettle. The demeanor of the saintly way, some from the holy lands of the 9 states secretly admired. The scene in front of them allowed many to see that the quality belonging to the saints was exhibited by the young Yi Futian. In the future, he would be a great commanding figure. They all understood that Yi Futian was betting with his own life. If the great Zhou's sacred king wanted to kill him, even the village chief could not stop it. Everyone's gaze fell on great Zhou's sacred king, whose eyes seemed to want to swallow Yi Futian whole. His abysmal gaze concentrated on Yi Futian with the mighty authority of the saints to exercise pressure, to render Yi Futian's body stiff to the point of impossibility to move. Yet, he still stared at the other's eyes without relenting. Now that barren state also possessed saints, they shared the same status as lords of holy lands. So if the great Zhou's sacred king had the audacity to kill him, why couldn't he? Murderers would have to pay with their lives. Now that barren state had saints, it could no longer be belittled by other holy lands of the 9 states. The execution of these two today was not only to get justice for Yaya but also to let everyone from the 9 states to see his determination. The barren state could not be provoked. The two stared at each other for a long time, and the expanse was silent. The great Zhou sacred king was keen and imperious from a young age, and it had served him well. But today he met his match in a young man who was not only similar to his younger self but perhaps even more ruthless. With an era between them, the two faced off against one another. Very well. Great Zhou's sacred king finally spat out the words. Staring at Yi Futian, he said, I didn't expect that barren state had finally produced a decent palace lord, but unfortunately, this one will be short-lived. Get the hell back to barren state, and prepare for the sacred war. The great Zhou's sacred king looked at Yi Futian. He said this lightly, as if he was commenting on a trivial matter, but everyone's heart was beating wildly. Sacred war. The land of 9 states had not participated in a sacred war for many years. Today, the great Zhou's sacred king told Yi Futian to prepare for sacred war. This will be your decision today, what you brought to barren state. Pray that you don't regret it. As the great Zhou's sacred king finished, he turned and walked toward the expanse. Above the firmament, there bloomed an incredibly radiant and dazzling glory. The phoenix sang, and the carriage of phoenix appeared from the void. Great Zhou's sacred king stepped into it and was departed. The people of the great Zhou sacred dynasty gave Yi Futian an icy look, especially Zhou Ya and Zhou Zi. It was frosty. For the first time, someone dared to cross the sacred king in this fashion. The barren state, Yi Futian must prepare to repent. The people of the Golden Phoenix army could not be easily killed by Yi Futian. The people of 9 states' holy lands took a deep breath. After all these years, would a sacred war break out in the land of the 9 states? Moreover, it was between the great Zhou sacred dynasty and the barren state, which had no saints for many years. Today, many seem to have witnessed the rise of the Holy Ji Palace of the barren state Holy Land. Or, would today be the beginning of the end for the Holy Ji Palace of the barren state, leading to its eventual demise? Sacred war, as the name implied, was the battle of saints. In the 9 states, whichever land that possessed saints could be called a holy land. Therefore, the battle of saints was equivalent to the battle of holy lands. For the 9 states, a sacred war meant war between holy lands. Great Zhou's scared king was about to launch a sacred war. A sacred war would definitely catch the attention of Emperor Xia. However, given the situation today, people of all holy lands in the 9 states felt that this was only natural. Yi Futian used his position at Holy Ji Palace in the barren state to challenge the great Zhou sacred king, and issued a command to execute those of the great Zhou sacred dynasty. It was not possible for the great Zhou sacred king to retaliate by killing Yi Futian right then and there, because after all, Yi Futian was a palace lord, and also there were his people to be taken into consideration. But would the great Zhou sacred king just let the matter slide? To allow Yi Futian to order the execution of his own people from the great Zhou sacred dynasty, and he just turned around and leave? Was it possible? If so, what would the world think of the great Zhou sacred king? The sacred king's own heart could not even allow it. He had ended up on the losing end in the confrontation with a young one. Therefore, the sacred war was inevitable. The Holy Ji Palace in the barren state had just started showing signs of promise, and now with the sacred war looming, it had a great possibility to be eradicated. Quickly, the people of the great Zhou sacred dynasty dispersed, and Yi Futian surveyed the people of Shihua Sacred Mountain. Lu Zong observed all this with tranquility. That day in the Nether Sword Mound, despite his exhortations, Yi Futian insisted on killing Chess Saint, thus creating the situation today. What would become of this exceptional and unrivaled young man? No one knew, and only time would tell. Perhaps he would not see Yi Futian grow into his own and become his opponent. If so, it would be a pity indeed. Let's go. The people of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had already left, and the Great Zhou Sacred King would launch the Sacred War. There was no need for the people of Shihua Sacred Mountain to linger here. Moreover, there was still the Sword Saint of the Void. Chapter 8:18. Once news of Tombkeeper Village's recent allegiance spread, shock filled the eastern state and continued to spread throughout the entirety of the 9 states. Once news of Tombkeeper Village's recent allegiance spread, shock filled the eastern state and continued to spread throughout the entirety of the 9 states. Palace Lord Yi Futian of the Holy Ji Palace in the Barren State had activated the Nether Sword Matrix within the Nether Sword Mound and slaughtered the Chess Saint. In doing so, he had gained the inheritance of the Sword Saint of the Void. From then on, Tombkeeper Village would be subordinate to the Barren State. The village chief of Tombkeeper Village was a saint and entered the Holy Ji Palace as a holy elder so that the Barren State could now possess saints. Yi Futian, the young leader of Barren State, left the Barren State, and in a year's time had left his name in the memories of the 9 states while also recruiting saints for the Barren State. It was no wonder that the previous palace lord had not hesitated to sacrifice himself and protect Yi Futian in that battle so that he could inherit the position of palace lord. There was further news that shocked 9 state. Yi Futian had openly insulted the Great Zhou Sacred King and had executed the king's deputies in front of him for the sake of 2 commoners. For this, Great Zhou Sacred King would launch the Sacred War. According to some, after Great Zhou Sacred King returned, he sent an envoy to the Xia state, where the people of Emperor Xia dwelt. To start a real sacred war between 2 holy lands, he would need to inform Emperor Xia. After all, Emperor Xia was the ruler of the 9 states, and all holy lands within the 9 state were under his dominion. Now that the Barren State had saints and caused such great turmoil, it was no longer the Barren State of before. Even the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty could not have its army directly advance on the Holy Ji Palace and eradicate it. Despite that fact, the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had begun to organize its army. An invisible storm was brewing. The 9 states had not had a sacred war for many years. Just how devastating could this one be? After everyone had left Tombkeeper Village, there were some who tried to enter the Nether Sword Mound but discovered that the matrix of the Nether Sword Mound had altered to such a degree of extreme danger that they were unable to enter. Tombkeeper Village's migration to the Barren State seemed to indicate that the Nether Sword Mound had now lost its significance. Under such circumstances, people naturally left it alone, as there was no incentive for them to risk their lives. Qi State and Jixia Holy Palace had gotten wind of the upcoming war. The battles at the 9 State Forum has already shocked them. Jixia Holy Palace had produced a once-in-a-century genius, Zhuge, who was naturally endowed with the 5 elements of the saint body. But even so, Zhuge was ranked behind 2 people from the 9 State Forum, one of whom had already been confirmed as a spirit body. Yu Sheng was this person, and it was no wonder that at the age of 15 he was already so ingenious that he could even conquer spiritual bodies, which indicated the immensity of his power. At this time, in a manor not far from Jixia Holy Palace, a young man in white sat quietly drinking tea, surrounded by some friends who were also discussing this matter. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng from the Holy Ji Palace in the Barren State are truly rare geniuses, hard to find in 100 years, and well known in the 9 State at such a young age. Perhaps, when Yi Futian inherited the title of Palace Lord, there were many who were waiting to see him make a mistake, but in just 2 years' time, the Barren State has absorbed saints and cultivators of the sage ranking. If it were not for Yi Futian's notorious challenge against the Great Zhou Sacred King, the rise of the Barren State would be unstoppable. Indeed, Zhouye was known to be the heir to the sacred king of the great Zhou sacred dynasty and challenged Yi Futian after the Nine-State Forum. Yi Futian leveraged his position as a palace lord in their exchanges with great arrogance, but in the end, Zhouye was at a disadvantage and had nothing to fight back with. If he was not of the Sage Plane and had had to participate in the Nine-State Forum, then he probably would have had to fight Yu Sheng. Between the two, it's hard to tell who's more exceptional. Many people praised and acknowledged that the reputation of Yi Futian and Yu Sheng were now beginning to spread to every corner of the 9 states. Brother Bai, it was said that you came from the Barren State and traveled in the 9 states. Did you know Yi Futian and Yu Sheng? Someone looked at the youth in white and asked. This young man was extraordinary in his stature, sitting quietly with refinement and gentility. I know them. The young man nodded. Everyone showed some interest and asked, what does Brother Bai think of their talents? The 9-state forum has already proved that they are rare finds in the 9 states. The youth appeared calm, but his heart palpitated. In just 2 short years, had he already grown to this degree? It seemed that the decision made by the palace lord and the master before their deaths was the correct one. He thought that once upon a time, he was hailed as the first genius of Barren State, the future saint of Barren State, and the succeeding palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace. That's right. Everyone smiled. On the side of the youth, a beautiful woman leaned over and poured tea for him. This woman was extremely attractive and known for her looks in the area. She smiled lightly. You are equally talented. In time, people in the 9 states will also know your name. Yes, Brother Bai is the most talented person that we have ever seen. The person next to him smiled and continued, what are your plans? Will you continue to stay in the 9 states? The young man shook his head gently and said, I plan to cultivate at Jixia Holy Palace. Having traveled throughout the land of the 9 state and reflected on all matters in the world, his perception was different from before. Back in the day, he was the chosen one and the focus of all in the Barren State. His every move was scrutinized because he was being trained as a saint, and there was no room for any mistakes. On his end, he worked hard to fulfill the hopes of the elders and to be the heir of the Holy Land. He had perfected himself so that he was worthy of the people's love. But just as he had said, there was no one perfect in the world. Looking at the world from different angles, there would be discoveries of different landscapes, so he left to experience the world in ways that might appear to be ordinary and insignificant. Now that he had comprehended certain things, Bai decided he ought to pursue other routes, such as cultivating with those who were the best in their field. We will congratulate Brother Bai in advance. Everyone laughed. If an ordinary person had mentioned his intention to go to Jixia Holy Palace to cultivate, he might be ridiculed. But since he was the one who breached the subject first, given his talent, there naturally would be no problem for him to enter Jixia Holy Palace. I want to go with you, the beautiful girl next to him said softly, and everyone who saw this smiled and then said their goodbyes. The young man felt the woman's gaze. His eyes focused somewhere far away, and his thoughts seemed to have been pulled back into the past, to a time when he once had feelings for a woman, a radiant woman whose temperament was different from his and who dared to challenge existing rules. I knew a woman who had captured my heart. We were betrothed when we were young, but she reneged. I didn't hold it against her. Later, our elders once again arranged a wedding for us, but on the day of the wedding, the man she loved showed up, and they both came to me, holding hands. The young man recalled the past and smiled. The woman stared at him with languor. Have you still not let it go? I have already let it go, but in my heart, there can be no more romantic feelings, the young man said to the woman. It doesn't matter, I can always keep you company. The woman smiled gently. I will hold you back, said the youth. I don't mind. The woman shook her head. The young man could only smile with resignation. Summer State, Xia Clan. The prosperous Xia Clan had been praised by many as the strongest force in the 9 states. Its familial branches meandered through countless regions, standing like the imperial palace within Summer State City. The Xia Clan itself was like a castle. No one dared to offend this ancient and venerable family. All holy lands of the 9 state had always maintained respect towards the Xia clan, because the Xia clan had the surname of Xia. However, above the sprawling complex of the Xia residence, there was a procession of shadows coming from the air with a carriage amongst them. Many figures rose up, intending to intercept the procession, but the person in front of the carriage took out a token, and everyone immediately backed away to stand respectfully on either side. The carriage kept going forward, heading toward the location of the Xia residence. Right then, at the Xia residence, a line of figures levitated toward the sky in a mighty procession. The man leading exuded an air of superiority, suggesting the status of the Saint Plain. This was the family head of the Xia clan, who led everyone to stand quietly, waiting for the arrival of the carriage. Soon, the carriage landed in front of them, and everyone looked at the figure inside the carriage. No one knew who the supervising inspector making their appearance was. Emperor Xia had established the 9 state guards in the land of Summer State to monitor the 9 state. But even if the commander of the 9 state guards himself came before Saint Xia, he was the head of the Xia clan and would not need to pay his respects. So, he just stood there quietly watching. At this point, a figure came out of the carriage and stepped forward. It looked to be a very handsome young man, around 20 or so, dressed in men's clothing, but with skin was so radiant and lovely that it surpassed the luster of a woman's. He certainly appeared more beautiful than any woman. If he were a woman dressed in a woman's clothing, she would have been an exceptional beauty. A woman disguised in men's clothing. Saint Xia was uncommon, and as a cultivator of the Saint Plain, this kind of disguise could not escape his eyes. Of all the supervising inspectors, there did not seem to be such a person. Who is she? What will be the business for the inspector's visit? Saint Xia asked, but the woman did not bother to speak. Instead, she took out a token and showed it to him. When Saint Xia saw the token, his heart jumped violently, and his mind raced quickly. He soon guessed the identity of the person. Kneel, Saint Xia commanded to everyone behind him, and then started bowing to greet the guest. Everyone from Xia clan who witnessed this scene was extremely shocked inside. What could command such obeisance from even their master? What was the meaning of that token? One after the other, they all knelt on one knee and bowed to the young man. No need as you were, the young man said. Great Zhou Sacred King has sent words regarding his intention to start a sacred war, so let the witness explain in detail what happened between the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty and the Holy Ji Palace. Yes. Saint Xia nodded and turned back to look at one person, the cultivator from Xia clan who had gone through the 9-state forum and the Nether Sword Mound. He went forward and explained the entire ordeal. After listening, the youth maintained a tranquil demeanor with no outward signs of turmoil, but a decision was made. Send words to the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty and the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State to announce the rules of the sacred war. The youth commanded the people behind him. Yes. Someone nodded, and suddenly, a party of cultivators levitated and departed. The youth returned to the carriage without another word, and the group left in the mighty formation just as they had come. Saint Xia looked at the departing figure, and there was trouble in his heart. Emperor Xia had let her come to the land of 9 state as a precursor. What kind of storm would this entail? Chapter 819, Barren State, Holy Ji Palace. Barren State, Holy Ji Palace. From the expanse, a mighty procession came in, and behind them, the cultivators of 1,000 holy islands followed. The palace lord of Holy Ji Palace, Yi Futian, had returned. Moreover, they have already learned that at 9-state forum, the Barren State had achieved brilliant records and placed first in all of the 9 states. Yusheng took the first place in 9-state forum. The Barren State had also performed brilliantly as well, making the top 100 and the top 50. When those who went to 9-state forum had brought back the news to the Barren State, it caused a great commotion. Those who had questioned Yi Futian before abandoned their old prejudices against him. That kind of achievement was a first in the 9 states, and Yusheng was sure to have a saintly existence in the future. The choice of the old palace lord had been correct. Yi Futian could indeed lead Holy Ji Palace to a new height. The palace lord is back. At this time, inside the Holy Ji Palace, voices were heard, and many figures suddenly levitated in the air. Some young disciples showed fervent enthusiasm and worship on their faces. These were youths who were of the same age, but when they were still cultivating at the Holy Ji Palace, Yi Futian had already led the people of Holy Ji Palace to compete with all the geniuses of the 9 states. "Greetings to the palace lord," said many people. Yi Futian looked at the ground below and nodded slightly at the crowd. Sage Wanxiang and others who were on his side, upon witnessing this scene, also felt a great sense of comfort. Now, Yi Futian's reputation in the Holy Ji Palace had reached a new height. There were no longer those voices of doubt when he first took over the Holy Ji Palace. Who are those people? Many noticed the people from Tombkeeper village, a great troop that followed behind Yi Futian. An old man was standing almost by Yi Futian's side. Even Sage Wanxiang and Zhuge Qingfeng were standing behind him. One's stance and position often indicated their status. At this time, there were a few more figures coming out of the air. It was Sage Dozhan, Sword Demon, Sage Daozong, and a few others who smiled and walked toward this direction. The mighty cultivators formed a welcoming party, like welcoming the triumphant return of heroes. However, Yi Futian at this moment did not have the joy of triumph. On the contrary, his mood was rather somber. The trip to the eastern state was extremely rewarding, but at the same time, they would be facing an unprecedented strong enemy, the great Zhou sacred dynasty. "Master, Uncle Master," Yi Futian called out, "summon everyone in the Holy Ji Palace. I have an announcement to make." Sage Dozhan and Sword Demon had a strange look on their faces and seemed to have felt the strangeness in Yi Futian's voice. They looked at Sage Wanxiang and Zhuge Qingfeng and understood that something grave may have happened. Okay. Several of them nodded immediately and began to summon all the cultivators of the Holy Ji Palace, and even brought together the island master of the 1,000 holy islands. It did not take long. On the impressive steps of the Holy Sage Pavilion at the Holy Ji Palace, Yi Futian and the others stood quietly, staring at the gathering crowd, and everyone at the palace was coming at an extremely fast speed. Gradually, there were fewer and fewer people coming, and Yi Futian took a step forward and gestured to everyone. Immediately, they quieted down. "A year ago, I took our people from the barren state to the eastern state to broaden our experiences, and some things happened, of which you must have heard about. At the 9-state forum, our barren state disciples achieved extremely brilliant results, no less brilliant than any other state in the 9 states. As Yi Futian spoke, everyone saw the determination in his eyes, and they slightly balled their fists. Their achievements at 9-state forum this time had really turned them into believers. The barren state had not been in contact with the 9 states for many years. Because there were no saints, many of them had felt inferior and did not feel they were equals. When Jisheng Cliffs of Yu State arrived, with how dazzling Qinzhong was, even the Holy Ji Palace seemed somewhat less impressive in front of Jisheng Cliffs. Thus, many principalities had chosen to attach themselves to Jisheng Cliffs. However, Yi Futian's appearance changed everything and proved some other things. Of course, I'm gathering you here today not to boast about the achievements of the barren state disciples in the 9-state forum, but to announce a few things. Yi Futian continued and looked at the village chief. The old village chief took a step forward and suddenly, countless people were looking at him, trying to guess his identity. The village chief of Tombkeeper village in the eastern state is of the Saint Plain. Now, he will lead Tombkeeper village into the Holy Ji Palace and be conferred as a holy elder, Yi Futian said with a calm voice, but just this sentence had shaken to their core. This old man was the cultivator of Saint Plain in the legends. Moreover, he was to be part of the Holy Ji Palace? Even Sword Demon, Sage Dozhan, and others trembled in their hearts. Although they felt he was extraordinary, they did not expect that he was of the Saint Plain. "Palace Lord, Saint Plain?" someone asked with trembling voice. Yi Futian looked at the village chief and in an instant his temperament changed suddenly. A holy power swept out, and the world seemed to be under the pressure of this great power. The entire Holy Ji Palace, in every corner, could feel this holy power. "It's a real saint?" Many had a fervent look on their faces. Yi Futian brought a cultivator of the Saint Plain to the barren state. "You can greet the elder now," Yi Futian said, and everyone responded by bowing and calling out, "Greetings to Holy Elder." For many years, the dream of the barren state, with the efforts of several generations, was to have a saint. But today, a cultivator of the Saint Plain had actually appeared in front of them as a holy elder. One could only imagine how this had impacted everyone. Even Sword Demon and Sage Dojan stepped out to pay their respects. "Greetings, holy elder," they said. Even top sages had to pay respect to saints. Sainthood was not only a plane but also a status symbol. In addition, the Holy Ji Palace will create the Nether Palace, and the Holy Elder will also serve as the Palace Lord of the Nether Palace, and the people of Tombkeeper Village will become disciples of the Nether Palace, Yi Futian continued. Tombkeeper Village had descended from Sword Saint of the Void, hence the name. Everyone took a deep breath. Not only was he conferred as elder, but a special palace had been set up for him. Obviously, the Palace Lord was serious. This saint was really going to cultivate here. How did the Palace Lord achieve this? Senior Yang. At this time, Yi Futian looked at another, and Yang Shao stepped out. Many showed a look of curiosity. Who might this be? The Palace Lord had addressed him as Senior. Yang Shao, the City Lord of Yujing City in the Eastern State, also a Sage Plain cultivator of the Sage and Saint ranking of the 9 states, has led some of his people from Yujing City to come here and enter our palace to cultivate. Therefore, the Holy Ji Palace will create the Matrix Palace, with Senior Yang Shao serving as the Palace Lord of Matrix Palace, with the study of matrices as the main subject. Afterward, anyone talented in the way of matrices will enter this palace to cultivate. Everyone's hearts trembled again. The strongest in the Sage and Saint ranking of the 9 states, with levels existing below the Saint Plane, was enough to be at the forefront of the Barren Sky rank. The strength of the Holy Ji Palace in the Barren State had greatly increased, and it was comparable to some of the Holy Lands in the 9 states. This is the good news. Next, there is bad news to announce. Yi Futian continued to speak to the excited crowd, and suddenly, everyone focused on him. Sword Demon, Sage Dojan, and the others flashed a look of concern on their faces. Yi Futian had returned with saints, yet he was still very solemn. It must have been terrible news. Our Holy Ji Palace, in the very near future, could be at war with the great Zhou sacred dynasty in the Holy Land of the Eastern State. Therefore, everyone must be mentally prepared, as this battle will be a matter of life or death. Even the survival of Holy Ji Palace depends on it. This is not a threat. As Yi Futian spoke, the excitement that was felt by the people turned into a sinking feeling. Yi Futian paused for a moment and did not continue until everyone had time to digest what he had to say. This war concerns life or death, and I don't want to force anyone, so I will give everyone some time to think things over. Before the start of the war, you may choose to leave, but from then on, you will no longer be a disciple of the Holy Ji Palace and won't be affected by this war. However, once this war is announced, you must strictly obey the order. If you leave the palace, you will be considered a deserter, your cultivation will be forfeited. Extreme times required extreme measures. This sacred war would also be a baptism by fire for the Holy Ji Palace. This was the same thought as when he was choosing who to bring to the Holy Temple to cultivate. When the sacred war began, only those who were willing to move in tandem with the palace would be kept around, and those who lacked determination would be sifted out. There was no sense in forcing these people to stay. It would be counterproductive. Today, I just wanted to give you a choice regarding this news. You are dismissed, Yi Futian said, then turned to leave, leaving behind countless shocked cultivators. These few words from Yi Futian caused a strong impact in their hearts, a feeling that could not be expressed. The palace had finally been sanctified, but the Holy Ji Palace would be at war with the Holy Land of the Eastern State. Sage Dojan and Sword Demon followed behind Yi Futian, and Sword Demon asked, "Is it really so serious?" "Yes." Yi Futian nodded. "All matters here at the palace, including Holy Elder and Palace Lord Yang, will require your attention, and I'm handing them over to you. I have been exhausted these days and I want to rest. If you have any questions, you can consult Master Uncle Wanxiang. All that's left to do now is to wait." "No problem." Sage Dojan nodded. "We will take care of things from here. Go do what you need to do." "Much indebted." Yi Futian smiled and left with Jiyu and the others. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng returned to their residence and saw a group standing quietly, waiting. Yi Qingxian walked to Yu Sheng's side and stood on her toes to adjust his shirt for him. Then she smiled and looked at Yi Futian. Did our Yu Sheng give you a long face? Yes, but look, who are we talking about? Yi Futian responded with a smile. In the palace, only those who were close to him did not treat him as the palace lord. Tired? Nandu Wanyin regarded Yi Futian gently. I'm all right, Mistress. Yi Futian nodded with a smile. When he agreed to become the palace lord, he was destined to face all these issues, Hua Fenglu whispered. Of course, he understood that Yi Futian had considered things carefully before agreeing to serve as the palace lord. This was not just about power, but truly a chore. Given that Baron State had no saints, he shouldered missions and responsibilities. The master is right. Now that I have chosen this road, I can only move forward. Yi Futian nodded and looked at Lulan Shui next to him and said, You've worked hard. Lulan Shui was looking after Hua Fenglu and Nandu Wanyin. She shook her head gently. Brother Futian. Just then a voice was heard, and Yi Futian turned and saw Long Linger and Mu Jiqiu coming toward him. Everyone in the palace knew that these two were good friends of Yi Futian, so the guards would not have stopped them from entering. Yi Futian looked at Long Linger and thought that time went by so fast. This girl was now 20, and she had become more graceful than ever. Looking at her reminded Yi Futian of Yaya. When he first got to know Linga, she was the same age as Yaya. However, she was a little more fortunate than Yaya. Even though her older uncle was gone, she had parents who treated her like a princess, and Yaya was the more pitiful one in comparison. When his thoughts turned to this, his hatred for the great Zhou sacred king intensified. He rubbed Long Linger's head. Long Linger habitually gave him a look of annoyance but did not make a big deal, letting him messing up her hair. Did you cultivate well? Yi Futian asked. Yes, Brother Futian, I am pretty good now, Long Linger said a little proudly. Go ahead and be boastful. Yi Futian smiled. Ling, go home and do not come to the palace for the time being. Oh. Long Linger shook her head and looked at Yi Futian. Brother Futian, you are the palace lord, you can't give me preferential treatment. You little girl. Yi Futian tapped on her head. This girl was way too shrewd even for him. Jiqiu, when can you get on the law rank? Yi Futian looked at Mu Jiqiu and asked with a smile. Mu Jiqiu was caught off guard and then smiled with a little bitterness. She had fought with Yi Futian once, but now, looking at everything that Yi Futian had done, she could only look from the sidelines. He had advanced too quickly. Don't make fun of me, Mu Jiqiu replied. Your natural talent is very strong, so sooner or later it will happen. Yi Futian smiled, but Mu Jiqiu did not say much. Lulan, have dinner prepared. I haven't had a good meal for a long time. Yi Futian smiled. Lulan Shui nodded, and the group enjoyed a peaceful dinner. But in the world outside, because of what Yi Futian had said, everything was chaos. Everything that Yi Futian had done spread toward in the barren state. After a few days, the shockwave reached the barren state. Yi Futian had slaughtered a saint. Even though it was done with the help of the Matrix, it was still a slaughtering of a saint, a legendary figure. And the young leader of the palace in the barren state had done so to a legendary figure that the barren state needed to look up to. The sovereign family of Zhongzhou City, Tingxue House, the Zhuge family of the Northern Territory, Alchemy City in the south of the barren state, and many other countless top forces were rocked by the news. This time, the barren state would face an unprecedented storm. Yi Futian and his people cultivated quietly. He was waiting for a message. A month later, finally, there was a procession of majestic figures appearing above the Holy Ji Palace, and they came directly above the Holy Sage Pavilion. Yi Futian took many of his people and levitated to meet those who were above. Where is Yi Futian? Someone in the expanse asked. Who wants to know? Yi Futian asked. 9 States Supervising Inspector, the person headed the group in the expanse replied. Yi Futian's eyes lit up. They finally came. What business does the supervising inspector have with us? Yi Futian asked. Great Zhou's sacred king sent a message to Emperor Xia, saying that he desired to initiate sacred war. He said that if Palace Lord Yi is willing to go to Great Zhou's sacred dynasty to repent on his knees and send the divine sword and Yaya into the Great Zhou sacred dynasty, the sacred war can be avoided. Does Palace Lord Yi desire war or peace? The supervising inspector announced. As his voice faded, everyone in the Holy Yi Palace revealed an angry look. It's outrageous. Several of the palace lords looked incredibly offended after hearing the proposal. Yi Futian gazed at the supervising inspector in the expanse, a spirited look on his face. He replied, "War? Very well." The supervising inspector nodded. From this moment forward, between the Great Zhou sacred dynasty and the Holy Yi Palace, the sacred war has been permitted according to the regulations of sacred war. Cultivators of the Saint Plane can only battle equals and are not permitted to kill anyone below the Saint Plane. Cultivators of the Sage Plane are not permitted to kill anyone below the Sage Plane. Families of cultivators who are outside of both domains are exempt from the war. 9 states guards will monitor this sacred war. Do you remember it all? The supervising inspector asked. Yi Futian nodded. Farewell. The supervising inspector nodded, and then the group left. Here was the declaration that the sacred war had now started. From this moment forward, Great Zhou's sacred dynasty and the Holy Yi Palace, following the rules, could kill anyone from the other side, unlimited by time, place, and means. It was easy to understand why such rules were put in place. If saints could slaughter anyone below the Saint Plane, then both sides may exhaust all of their people except for cultivators of the Saint Plane. Chapter 820. Countless people from the Holy Yi Palace raised their head and looked at the figure disappearing into the air. The 9 states supervising inspector was a term that was unfamiliar to the majority of them. The Baron state had very little interaction with the 9 states and was nearly forgotten in the past. It was only until Yi Futian stepped out of the Baron state that they entered the vision of the 9 states again. Countless people from the Holy Yi Palace raised their head and looked at the figure disappearing into the air. The 9 states supervising inspector was a term that was unfamiliar to the majority of them. The Baron state had very little interaction with the 9 states and was nearly forgotten in the past. It was only until Yi Futian stepped out of the Baron state that they entered the vision of the 9 states again. However, they also understood that the 9 states supervising inspector was the subordinate of Emperor Xia, the ruler of the 9 states. Battles between holy lands needed the approval of Emperor Xia and for him to set the rules before it could begin. Emperor Xia had approved the battle between the 2 holy lands, but to prevent those of higher cultivation indiscriminately killing those of lower cultivation level, he had set this rule to prevent harm from coming to the loved ones of those in battle. This was a tacit agreement in the cultivation world. Yi Futian stood in the air above the Sage Palace, looking at the disappearing figure with a serious expression. The Great Zhou sacred dynasty was once the ruler of the eastern state and had a strong heritage of ruling over boundless regions. The Great Zhou sacred dynasty was different from the Holy Yi Palace. The Holy Yi Palace was more devoted to imparting knowledge and skills, while the Great Zhou sacred dynasty was an imperial faction, so it would naturally have stricter control over regions under its dominion. For example, even though Yi Futian was the palace lord, he was unable to command the Baron state's elite factions to battle for him. However, the Great Zhou sacred king could. With a single command, he could assemble a huge army from all the factions in the regions under his control. Coupled with the fact that the Baron state had been weakened for many years, even though their performance in the 9-state forum was brilliant, their overall strength was definitely inferior to the Great Zhou sacred dynasty, no matter which cultivation level they considered. The start of the sacred war was a matter of life and death for the Baron state. Moreover, once the sacred war started, any methods could be used, assassinations and interceptions for example. This also meant that from the moment the supervising inspector had announced the start of the sacred war, the people from the palace could be attacked at any moment. Yi Futian looked at the ground and said in a clear voice, "From now on, the Holy Yi Palace will enter a state of battle. All disciples cultivating in the palace are to be on alert and no one will leave without orders." As his voice sounded, everyone felt the tension in the air. In this period of time, about 1/3 of the disciples in the Holy Ji Palace had left. After all, to many people, they had only come to the palace to cultivate and did not have too much emotional attachment to it. Since Yi Futian had given them a choice, they would naturally leave. Among those who left, the majority were under the sage plane. Their wills were not firm and had only come to the palace in pursuit of higher cultivation level and were unwilling to fight for the palace to the death. Apart from that, the palace will now have Sage Hall disciples. As the name suggests, they will be the core of the palace. In this sacred war, those who have achieved feats will be promoted to Sage Hall disciples and can enter the Sage Hall to cultivate, Yi Futian continued. Seeing the serious expressions on the faces of the disciples below, he had an astute expression as he delivered the rest of his speech. When I brought the palace's disciples to participate in the 9-state forum, we suffered the cold shoulder from many holy lands. However, the palace's disciples had the most outstanding performance in the 9-state forum. As such, although this sacred war may be a crisis, it is also an opportunity. If the Holy Ji Palace can stand tall after the sacred war, from then on, nobody can stop the palace's uprising in the 9 states. All the disciples that participate in this sacred war will shake the 9 states alongside me in the future. Many people felt their blood boil as they heard Yi Futian's words. Yi Futian had already done what they had thought to be impossible in the past. The group that followed Yi Futian, namely Yu Xing, Yi Wuchen, Su Kei, and the rest had shone brightly in the 9-state forum. They also hoped that they would one day be able to head out towards the 9 states. Relay the news to the various factions. Yi Futian looked towards the people beside him and said. Sage Dozhan and the rest nodded. They knew Yi Futian's intentions. Although he did not say it, he was asking for assistance from the rest of the Barren States factions. Relying on the Holy Ji Palace's strength alone was insufficient to stop the great Zhou sacred dynasty's army. There were too few experts in the palace. However, this was a matter of life and death. Yi Futian could not force the other factions in the Barren State to participate, so he could only let them choose. Even if they were unwilling to participate in the war, Yi Futian would not hold a grudge against them. Holy Elder, Palace Lord Yang, let us formulate a few battle matrices for group battles. Yi Futian looked at the village chief and Yang Xiao. In a battle between armies, battle matrices would be very important as it could increase one party's strength drastically. Okay. The two of them nodded. In a sacred war, battle matrices were essential. Moreover, they needed other matrices to adapt to different circumstances. Okay, let's all make preparations for battle, Yi Futian said, and the crowd started to disperse. The Holy Ji Palace started to become busy. Yi Futian looked into the air. At that moment, he felt as though he could understand why Lu Chan was so radical back then. The Barren State was weak, so if it could not rise up, it would face destruction in the face of these kinds of situations. At the same time, the supervising inspector descended upon the Holy Ji Palace. Another supervising inspector also descended upon the capital of the great Zhou sacred dynasty, where countless factions had gathered. The great Zhou sacred king had an overbearing personality. With his character, he would not give Yi Futian the luxury of time. He evidently had no plans to fight a drawn-out fight against the Holy Ji Palace, but instead, he had planned to lead his army towards the Barren State and take down the Holy Ji Palace in one fell swoop. Yi Futian would pay for his actions. All the holy lands in the 9 states were paying close attention to the sacred war. After the news had spread, some factions in the 9 states had already started making their way towards the Battle Sage Palace. They knew that the first battle in the sacred war would take place in the Barren State. The great Zhou sacred dynasty's army would directly descend from the air. For someone of the great Zhou sacred king's stature, Yi Futian had not given him any face when he had killed his underling in front of him that day, so he would definitely not allow Yi Futian to live. No matter how outstanding Yi Futian was or how likely he was to enter the divine path, once he was killed, all of that would no longer matter. It was rumored that he had entered the Sage Plane not long ago and was still at the lowest level of the Sage Plane. Under these circumstances, Yi Futian would pose no threat in the Sage Plains battles and would even need the protection of others. Shihua Sacred Mountain and Jisheng Cliffs were the first to reach the barren state. At that moment, in a restaurant in the barren state's Zhongzhou city, a group of experts from Jisheng Cliffs had arrived. Kong Yao had come personally and was drinking wine in the restaurant. Everything that had happened in the Nine-State Forum and in the Nether Sword Mound had made Jisheng Cliffs feel threatened by the barren state's existence. However, before they had the chance to do anything, the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had already initiated the Sacred War. This had saved the Jisheng Cliffs much effort. Now, they only needed to watch the unfolding war in silence. There had been no sacred war in the Nine States for a long time. Hopefully, this sacred war would not be disappointing. At the same time, the barren states factions had also received the news. Alchemy City's City Lord Office, Armorer Pavilion. Yu Qi was personally creating a ritual implement. As he was topless, the muscles on his body were scorched by the flames. Not just him, but many elite experts from the City Lord Office were creating ritual implements with him. At that moment, a middle-aged figure walked in and said, "Father, why are you doing this? Just leave this to the Uncle Masters. In Armory, if I claim to be second in the barren state, nobody will dare to claim to be first. If we want to create elite sage ritual implements as soon as possible, I will definitely need to do it personally," Yu Qi said. The middle-aged person he was replying to was his eldest son, Yu Mu. "Father, you have decided to participate in this time's sacred war?" Yu Mu asked. "Your younger sister and that asshole Shui Yi are still in the palace. How can I sit around?" Yu Qi glared at him and replied. He then stopped the actions on his hand and ordered, "You all will finish the final step of creating the ritual implement." As he said that, he turned around and left, casually putting on a shirt that was drenched in his sweat and walking out of the Armorer Pavilion. "Order some men to gather all the best ritual implements in Alchemy City," Yu Qi said to Yu Mu. A glint appeared in Yu Mu's eyes, and he asked, "It seems like Father is preparing to muster all our forces. What if we lose the sacred war?" With Alchemy City's current position, even if the Holy Ji Palace and all the other factions in the barren state are replaced, Alchemy City will continue to stand tall, Yu Qi said with confidence. Because they specialized in armory, there would be no faction that would not welcome strong armorers with open arms. However, it is also our limiter. After cultivating for a long period of time, we start to lack the passion that youngsters have. Look at many of the older people in the barren state, they don't even dare to participate in the sacred war. Aren't they just waiting to die? Look at Yi Futian, he brought the barren state out and obtained first in the Nine-State Forum. Do you understand what that means? Yu Qi looked at Yu Mu and asked. Yi Futian is indeed an extraordinary genius. If given enough time, he will definitely be able to enter the divine path, Yu Mu replied. Someone who dares to stand proudly in front of saints and kill the great Zhou Sacred King's descendants in front of him will definitely enter the divine path. Not just him, Yu Sheng, even Yi Wuchen and the others will also have a chance, Yu Qi continued coolly. When things reach an extreme, they can only continue in the opposite direction. The barren state has had no saints for many years. Now we have ushered in an explosive era. This will be a huge era. If we are able to overcome these obstacles, the barren state's future will be limitless. Yi Futian was sent up to the position of palace lord by the entire barren state. Then, let us escort him this time. Yu Qi continued. Also, go and inform the citizens of Alchemy City to gather their families' elites from each plane. Father, Yu Mu was stunned. He was preparing to make all the families and factions of Alchemy City participate in the sacred war? What if they do not agree? Yu Mu asked. After all, the opponent was after the Holy Ji Palace. It was a sacred war. Even I, the city lord, will participate. If they want to stay out of it, I'll kill them first, Yu Qi said nonchalantly. Send people to the Fire Emperor Palace and Goddess Pavilion as well. I do not have control over the other regions of the barren state, but in the southwest region, I have the final say. Okay. Yu Mu nodded as he replied. It seemed like his father was serious this time. At the same time, in the barren state's eastern region, The Divine Sky City's top 3 schools had already been unified and were under Qin Yuan's control. When news of the Sacred War reached them, Qin Yuan had also gathered the experts from the top 3 schools and the Divine Sky City's forces. He gathered the experts from each plane and prepared to head towards the palace to participate in the war. The current leader of the Barren State was the son from his starry school. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.